Chapter 129. Rampager Lost Control? Klein's heart tightened as he nearly blurted out his question. Even though Dunn and Old Neil had frequently emphasized the possibilities of losing control and the harm it caused, this was the first time he was experiencing an incident like that. He felt a little horrified, a little lost, a little scared, and a little saddened. He felt extremely mixed emotions. Among the cases that we have to deal with annually, a quarter of them were a result of beyonders who lost control. And among the quarter of cases, a large number of them are our teammates. Dunn's words flashed past Klein's mind, slowing his reaction. Old Neil, who had experienced many incidents like this, immediately asked, "Where is the Rampager? What do you need us to do?" Klein was taken aback from hearing this. He had believed that a sleazy, half-retired personnel like Old Neil would find an excuse to reject Swain's request, or extort a huge sum in exchange for his help. Never did Klein expect Old Neil to participate without any hesitation, not minding the differences between Nighthawks and mandated punishers. Klein suddenly understood something when he looked at the serious Old Neil. It didn't matter if they were Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or machinery hive mind. Their aim was to stop supernatural powers from harming the innocent and maintain peace and stability in Tingen. If they were met with a dangerous and urgent situation, their sense of duty would propel them to help without hesitation. Swain answered succinctly, "Be my support." He didn't explain why the person lost control, or where the Rampager was. Instead, he made his way to the exit quickly. This ex-captain of the mandated punishers was clearly an old alcoholic, but Klein realized that he could not keep up with the man's pace. He needed to break into a jog to ensure that he was not left behind. He turned his head to look at Old Neil, only to see the old mystery prior break into a run. The three of them didn't pay any attention to the gazes of the guards on their way there. One of them had an old Navy uniform draped over him. Another was in a dark classic robe, and the other in a black windbreaker. They charged out of the billiard room and into Evil Dragon Bar. The customers who were drinking shifted their gazes from the rat-baiting competition to Klein and company. "Is that Boss Swain? Where's he going in such a hurry? Did someone default on their loan?" Amidst the soft murmurs, some of the customers focused their attention back to the cage. They once again broke into an uproar, venting the stresses of their day. However, some of the more perceptive customers felt a faint sense of unease. Tap, tap, tap. Klein, Old Neil, and Swain ran across the road and entered the harbor district. On that boat, Swain slowed down and pointed at a cargo ship not far away. Two mandated punishers are circling the Rampager, preventing him from entering the Tussock River. Help me influence him and bring him under control. Leave the rest to me. Old Neil panted for air and said, "All right, B, but you have to give me a minute." "A minute to recover." Swain nodded and didn't say any more. He charged up to the ship and joined the fight. Upon hearing the sounds of combat on the ship, Old Neil looked at the somewhat nervous Klein. He took out a piece of silver about the size of a baby's palm from a hidden pocket near his waist. He then passed the silver to Klein and said, "Slumber charm. The incantation to activate this amulet is the phrase, Evernight, in ancient Hermes. After you finish the incantation, inject your spirituality into the charm, and then throw it at the target after 3 seconds." "All right." Klein extended his hand to receive the charm and felt moved. This charm was carved with Hermes incantations on both sides, as well as the corresponding symbols, path numbers, and the spell's characteristics. He didn't need to activate his spirit vision to feel the deep, serene power flowing within the charm. Old Neil stood up straight and took out a similar charm from his hidden pocket and held it in his palm. He joked as he walked toward the cargo ship. "Do not be too nervous. Relax and think about something else. For example, I lent you that charm. If you're going to use it, remember to make one for me in return. Of course, you can wait till next month, when you receive a new quota of materials before you do so." He really is the experienced Old Neil. Klein placed the charm into his left pocket, reached into his holster, took out his revolver, and adjusted the hammer and drum. "I don't feel that nervous anymore." He had a gun in one hand and his cane in the other. He made his way up the steps with Old Neil and boarded the cargo ship. This cargo ship had obvious signs of age. Although it was powered by steam and had a chimney, it retained its past fixtures such as its mast and sails. Furthermore, only its surface and some other portions were plated with metal. The remaining sections of the ship were still made of wood. As the sounds of the battle intensified, Klein and Old Neil suddenly heard a loud noise amid the din, while searching for a way to enter the cabin. The wooden cabin was instantly shattered, its fragments flying everywhere. A figure fell through the hole and crashed onto the side of the ship. Klein didn't have the luxury of time to evaluate the man's injuries. His gaze was focused on the monster, which was charging towards the hole. The monster was over 1.8 meters in height and was wearing a tattered shirt and trouser. Its ankles were covered with dark green scales, and a layer of skin had formed between its fingers and toes, as if they were the webbed limbs of an aquatic creature. It had a head covered in wrinkles, still barely resembling a human. Its scales were coated with a sticky fluid that continuously dripped onto the floor. Sizzle! The sticky dark green liquid corroded the deck slightly, leaving visible marks behind. Bam! Swain punched the monster from the side, causing it to stagger 2 steps to the side. Bam! 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 Even with the ridiculous muscles Swain had, he was clearly inferior to the monster. Despite having his punches and kicks connect, they were unable to smash through its scales and cause physical harm. Swain was momentarily reduced to a wretched state as he staggered. If not for Swain's astounding sense of balance and the efforts of the other mandated punishers to shoot and suppress the monster, Klein suspected that this blue-eyed elder would have been beaten to death by the monster. Thud! 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 Swain took multiple steps back, then advanced once again, like a moth to a flame. But Klein could sense that he was accumulating something, waiting for something. Bam! Swain was sent to retreat, his body obscuring another mandated punisher's field of vision. The monster took this chance to charge towards the opening. It wanted to escape the ship and jump into the tussock river. Looking at the wrinkled, sticky head of the monster, Klein lifted his right hand and pulled the trigger. Bang! The silver demon hunting bullet hit the monster's body, just as he predicted. But it had only hit its scales and failed to fully penetrate its body. The monster let out an ear-piercing shriek before it exerted strength with its feet and pounced at Klein. When a stinking fishy smell hit him, Klein suddenly hunched down and rolled to the side. Clang! He felt the ship shake as fragments had hit it as well. At the same time, he heard an old but deep voice recite an incantation in ancient Hermes. Evernight. Klein rolled over 2 more times. He couldn't care about his cane as he lifted his head and revolver in a fluster. All he saw was Old Neil tossing out his charm calmly. Despite being incredibly close to the monster, the piece of silver was instantly swallowed by a dark red flame and released the faint sound of an explosion. A deep, serene power spread forth. The monster, who had almost destroyed the side of the shop, rocked. Its movements became sluggish. Swain charged out from the cabin. He approached the creature and pulled back his arm, hitting the monster like a jackhammer. His punches connected with the head of the monster, but he could barely inflict a wound, let alone cause any fatal damage. But Klein could sense that whatever the blue-eyed elder was accumulating had finally reached its peak. Boom! The monster seemed to recover. It flailed its arm and made Swain take 5 steps back in retreat. Each of his steps caused cracks to form on the deck. Seeing that the monster was about to turn around and jump off the cargo ship, Klein took out the slumber charm from his pocket in a hurry, after which he expertly recited the phrase in ancient Hermes, Evernight. Suddenly, Klein felt the silver charm in his hand turn ice cold, as if it was made from snow. He didn't think too much about it. He injected his spirituality into the charm, then pulled his arm back before throwing it forward, sending the charm flying towards the monster. Meanwhile, the fish-and-human monster had jumped into the air. The dark red flames illuminated the surrounding darkness, and the faint explosion was like a prelude to a slumber as it quickly radiated outwards. Bam! The monster fell onto the dock, squirming into a ball. It was temporarily in a half-asleep state. Klein was just about to rush to the side of the boat and shoot at the monster's head when he suddenly saw Swain charge out and jump over. his navy uniform already long gone. He changed his posture in the air, his muscles tightening. Using his spiritual perception, Klein could feel something that had been suppressed erupt. Swain descended from the sky and slammed into the body of the monster. He then straightened his back and landed a heavy fist on the head of the monster. Crack! The monster's skull shattered into pieces. Dark red blood and grayish brain matter, laced with the green sticky liquid, splattered all over the ground. This is one of the abilities of a folk of rage, Klein muttered to himself as he stood near the broken side of the ship. Old Neil held his left arm and leaned over to look at what had happened below. At that moment, Swain was standing straight. He stared at the monster under his feet that had just lost its life. He took out a metal flask and opened the lid. He drank a good half of the liquor before tilting the flask, pouring the remaining liquor onto the monster. After finishing this, Swain looked like he had aged considerably, his back hunching a little. Old Neil sighed as he looked at the scene below. He whispered to Klein, "I know this mandated punisher who lost control." He had followed Swain for almost 30 years, once clearing water ghosts who had been killing people on the shore. He also captured evil beyonders who were trying to escape through the Tussock River. He didn't continue, but Klein understood what he wanted to say. A guard who had made many contributions and killed countless monsters ended up becoming a monster himself. This was not an isolated incident. It was a possible outcome that many members of the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or machinery hive mind would one day face. Chapter 130. Backlund's secret gathering. Klein looked at Swain standing before the monster's corpse before looking sideways towards the mandated punisher, who was helping his semi-conscious partner up by the arm. Klein suddenly felt an indescribable sadness. It was almost impossible for members of the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and the machinery hive mind to be known as heroes. The things they did were never made known to the public, but only hidden in confidential dockets. But the danger and pain they endured were ever so real. Perhaps there would be a day when my enemy will be one of my teammates. Klein sighed silently. He felt the heavy weight that all Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and machinery hive mind carried. At that moment, old Neil let out a sigh. "Let's go. Let's not disturb them." "Okay." Klein picked up his cane. Just as he widened his stride, he suddenly noticed that old Neil was still holding his left hand. He asked, concerned, "Are you hurt?" Old Neil chuckled briefly before saying, "I got stabbed by one of the shrapnel earlier. If I was still young, I definitely would have been able to dodge it. Luckily, it's just a small cut." He moved his right hand slightly to let Klein see the tiny wound that was still lightly bleeding on the back of his left hand. After he confirmed that it wasn't a big issue, Klein walked off along the gangway as he sighed. "Mr. Neil, you're much calmer than I imagined." Despite being less than 2 meters away from the monster, you could still chant the incantation calmly and use the charm. Although the rampaging mandated punisher had leaped towards Klein in the form of a monster, old Neil was physically very close to him the entire time. Old Neil chucked at the compliment. "I'm an experienced Nighthawk. Among the dangerous things that I've done, what happened just now isn't even in my top 10. Once, when I was patrolling Raphael Cemetery with Dunn, I had no idea that a corpse had turned into a zombie and left its tomb to lie in ambush in the shadows of the trees. I passed by without noticing it at all since I was looking for some hidden spot. You know what I mean. In the end, he leapt onto my back and seized my throat." Klein felt gripped by terror when he heard the recollection, as he voiced out his guess. "And under such a situation, you were still calm enough to use a charm? Or did you use some spell that a mystery prior could cast quickly?" Old Neil stole a glance at him and chortled. "No, Dunn managed to drag that zombie into a slumber in time. I'm telling you this story to tell you that, as a Nighthawk, you not only have to believe in yourself, you also have to trust your teammates too." Klein fell silent for a few seconds. Then he replied both sincerely and jokingly, "Mr. Neil, you are so wise today." Old Neil did a tiny hop and found his footing on the pier. He replied in disdain, "That's because you only get to know the most trivial side of me usually." The two of them left the harbor and walked towards Evil Dragon Bar. Klein put away his revolver, set his cane aside, and took off his jacket. Under the light of the gas street lamp, he started checking if there was any damage to his jacket. How lucky! There are only a few splinters and a patch that got dirted. He removed the splinters and roughly patted the dust away. Then he put it back on. Old Neil looked at him with a smile, and mimicked his tone by adding leisurely, "What a pity, there's no way to claim compensation." Klein was temporarily at a loss for words. "I'm not such a person," he emphasized in his heart. As the public carriage arrived, Klein took out his silver vine-leaf pocket watch and flipped it open to check the time. "If there's nothing else, I have to head home," he turned to tell Old Neil. Old Neil nodded slightly and said, "Enjoy your dinner at home. You don't need to think about the slumber charm. I'll get Swain to compensate me. He's a rich man after all. Of course I won't go today. I have to consider his mood." Klein opened his mouth, but in the end he only said, "Thank you for your generosity." He boarded the carriage quickly and returned to Daffodil Street. It was already past 7 in the evening, and the sky had already grown dark. Klein took out his keys to open the door and saw Melissa taking off her fishnet hat and setting it on the clothes rack. He smiled and did small talk. "You just got back?" Then, his mixed emotions suddenly vanished, and he felt relaxed and warm. "There was a practical lesson in school today," Melissa explained seriously. Klein sniffed and smelled the fragrance of food. He was stunned and asked subconsciously, "Then who's cooking dinner?" The moment he finished his sentence, both of them answered the question in unison. "Benson." Their tone had a hint of alarm. Benson, who had heard their conversation, walked out of the kitchen. While wiping his hands on an apron, he said, "Do you have no confidence in my cooking? I remember that before Melissa learned how to cook, you two would wait for me to come home and watch me cook with anticipation. Actually, cooking is so easy. You want potato beef stew? Put in the beef first, then the potatoes, then add some seasoning." Klein and Melissa exchanged glances and remained silent. Putting aside his cane and took off his hat, Klein turned around and smiled. "I think it's time to hire a maidservant. It's very unhealthy to not eat dinner on time. But I don't want to have a stranger next to us when we chat. That'll make me feel uncomfortable," Melissa said, subconsciously finding an excuse to object. Klein spoke with a smile as he took off his jacket. "I don't mind." Just then his expression froze, and he stopped what he was doing. "I almost took off my jacket. I still have a revolver at my armpit. Ahem." He cleared his throat and pretended nothing happened. "Don't mind her. When we get home, we can let the maidservant rest in her room. I doubt any maidservant would dislike resting. We must find a maidservant who's willing to learn how to cook." He didn't want to endure the torture of a cuisine that left him guessing in the future. Benson stood at the kitchen and nodded in agreement. "When we have time, we can go over to Tingen Family Servant Assistance Association. They have a great deal of experience and many resources in this field." "All right, it's decided then." Klein ignored Melissa's unwilling look. Backlund, Empress Borough, Viscount Glaint's residence. Audrey Hall left the party with her personal maid Annie. They came to the second floor and entered the bedroom that the Viscount had prepared. She took off her glamorous dress and her lightweight dancing heels slowly with Annie's assistance. She then put on a black hooded robe that she had prepared ahead of time. Pulling up the hood, Audrey stood before the full mirror and examined herself. She saw that more than half her face was covered by the shadow of her hood, and only her beautiful lips were clearly exposed. Long black robe, face hidden by shadows, a mysterious feeling. "This is something I've been dreaming of wearing all this time," Audrey thought to herself happily. Worried, she added a blue boat-shaped soft hat under her hood, with the fine checkered fishnet drooping down. Her facial features became even more indiscernible. "Not bad, that's it." Audrey stuffed her feet into leather ankle boots, looked to the side and told Annie, "Wait for me here. No matter who comes, do not open the door." Annie looked at her helplessly and said, "But you have to make sure that your trip doesn't take more than an hour. You should trust me. I have kept my promise every single time in the past." Audrey smiled and leaned in towards her personal maidservant. She hugged her and kissed her cheek as etiquette demanded. Then, she walked quickly and pulled up her hood. Turning around, she exited the bedroom through a secret door. She walked all the way down and came to the side door of the Viscount's residence, where she saw that there was already a carriage waiting there. Glaint stood amidst the shadows as he glanced at Audrey and complimented sincerely. "By dressing up like this, you are really, like the description Emperor Roselle often used, very cool." "Thank you." Audrey pulled up an imaginary skirt and curtsied elegantly. The two of them got into the carriage and left the villa. They arrived at a house about 10 minutes away. Outside the house, Audrey saw Apprentice Furs Wall and her friend, Tribunal Xiao, whom she had been seeing recently. Furs' slightly wavy brown hair and her light blue eyes showed a natural laziness. She pointed at Xiao next to her and said, "She's an excellent persuader, capable of helping you get things that you want." Xiao was slightly shorter, about 150 centimeters at most. Her facial features were soft, but she seemed pretty young and immature, although her shoulder-length blonde hair was messy and unkempt, and she was in a traditional night training suit. She carried an indescribable look of dignity and a convincing charm. Audrey had met her a few times. She smiled faintly and greeted, "Miss Xiao, can I trust you? You don't have to worry at all." Xiao smiled and gestured with her hand. Just as she walked to follow Audrey and Viscount Glaint, they heard a sudden thud. Audrey looked towards the source of the sound and saw that a triangular blade coruscating with a cold glimmer had fallen beside Xiao leg. Audrey and Xiao exchanged looks, simultaneously at a loss for words. After nearly 20 seconds, Xiao quickly squatted and picked up the triangular blade and hit it on her body. "We have to prevent the occurrence of an accident. Some people lack rationality, and they aren't convinced easily," Xiao explained seriously. Audrey nodded and replied with a clear voice, "I believe you. These are tools to convince those bastards to talk to us calmly," Furs added, looking sideways at the grass plains. The quartet didn't continue conversing and walked a few steps forward. They knocked on the wooden door with 3 long and 2 short knocks. The door squeaked and opened. Slowly, using her spectator state, Audrey looked into the house that had many people sitting around randomly. They employed various methods such as hoods or masks to conceal their looks. Some didn't even bother and exposed their faces openly. Almost instantly, Audrey noticed a black-robed man on a single-seat sofa. That man wore a hood too, hiding his looks under a shadow. He looked at all the guests in silence, giving people a feeling that he was somehow in a commanding position. He is very confident, but his gaze is very disgusting. His gaze moved up and down my body like 2 slippery tentacles wanting to tear off my clothes. Audrey's senses were sharp. She carefully observed and made a judgment calmly, but she nearly had goosebumps. Furs introduced him. "That's Mr. A powerful Beyonder, the leader of this secret gathering." Chapter 131. Transaction Mr. A? That sounds more like a code name for a criminal, rather than a powerful man of mystery. It can't be compared to the Fool at all. No, only gods or demigods can be compared to Mr. Fool. Audrey felt a sense of superiority as she thought about this. She looked calmly at Mr. A and spoke to Furs and Xiao with a hushed tone. "Are there any stories about this man?" The hooded Viscount Glaint was equally curious. Xiao replied sternly, "There were several such incidents in the past. Sequence 8 Beyonders, some even at Sequence 7, have targeted and tried to deal with Mr. A. But they've all mysteriously disappeared." "So he truly is a powerful Beyonder," Glaint marveled. They walked into the room as they spoke. The guards immediately closed the door behind them. After adjusting to the gas lamp's light in the room, Audrey saw 2 blackboards with several phrases written across them right in front of her. At that moment Furs, who had an unlit cigarette in her hand, whispered, "Those are the requests of the members of this gathering. You should be able to understand that many people do not wish for others to know what they possess, to avoid being a target of greedy people. Thus they write their requests, or what they are selling, as well as the rough price on the blackboards anonymously." Audrey nodded. She didn't care to observe the members of the meeting. Instead, she shifted her gaze to the words on the left board. "I need a pair of eyes from a mature manhow fish. The dust left behind by vengeful spirits, 165 pounds. 3 pages from Emperor Roselle's notebook, £20. Audrey couldn't maintain the state of her spectator when she saw that. She was as shocked as she was excited. These prices are too cheap, she thought in excitement and joy. As she walked, her gaze shifted as she saw other notices. Tears of an infant flower, £200. Mummy powder, 10 grams, £5. Fishman secretion, 30 milliliters, £29. Formula for sequence 8 potion sheriff, £450. Just too cheap. The Beyonder ingredients all cost less than £300. Audrey's eyes sparkled as she found a place to sit together with her companions. Xiao Derichao leaned over and whispered into her ear. Do you have anything you want? Audrey breathed heavily. Emperor Roselle's famous quote flashed through her mind. I want it all. She had 2 elder brothers, rendering her eligibility to inherit the aristocratic title and the main portion of the inheritance null. But as a lady adored by her parents and brothers, she had property, farmland, pastures, mines, jewelry, stocks, and bonds to her name. Together, they were valued at £300,000. This was a part of her inheritance, but she only possessed them in name before her father, Count Hall, passed away, or when she got married. Every year, she received a corresponding amount from a trust fund. But even so, she could receive £15,000 to £25,000 a year, making her one of the richest women among the nobles in the entire Lone Kingdom. Of course, she had expenses she couldn't avoid as a noble, and now that she was receiving annual payouts, she could no longer pester her parents for money all the time. She controlled herself and answered with reservation. For the time being, I have my sights on Emperor Roselle's notebook. I adore him, and I think that the special symbols and literature he created hold a mysterious power. It's just that we haven't found the correct way to decipher them. Audrey, you are becoming more and more hypocritical, she added in her heart. Just as she had said that, a young man in a white shirt sitting near them stood up excitedly. He agreed with Audrey. Yes, that's true. I've finally met someone who shares the same opinion as me. I'm the person with the 3 pages of the notebook, and I can sell them to you right now. Audrey was at a loss at first before she replied with a smile. Then please allow me to express my gratitude. She took out a pair of £10 notes and handed them over to the man, then received the 3 pages of Emperor Roselle's diary in exchange. Of course, no one here knew that they were part of his diary, and thus everyone generally called them his notebook. Audrey flipped through the pages after she received them and confirmed that the writing was similar to the previous pages that she had come across. She put away the diary and asked Xiao and Fur softly, Who can I look for if the notes are fake? Mr. A? Yes, Mr. A will not allow any fraud to take place in his gathering. And I could help you mediate this privately too, Xiao Derichao replied eagerly. I understand. Audrey entered her spectator state and surveyed the Beyonders and Beyonders to be around her. There were many people looking over, because of the excitement of the young man just now. They were observing Audrey and Glaint, some making it obvious while others were more discreet. But Audrey and Glaint's hoods covered their features well. There are sofas and chairs strewn all around the venue, all facing the board. The material of the furniture is rather normal, indicating that the person who gathered them here, Mr. A, isn't a noble and doesn't care much about the venue. Yes, with the confidence he displayed, he need not be overly pretentious with the venue. Audrey looked around and calmly observed. Mr. A looks at all the ladies present, his gaze often lingering on those who have above-average looks. He's lecherous. Why is he looking at me so frequently? Can he see through my robe? Audrey was shocked at this deduction. She felt disgusted, as if she had just eaten a fly. But her worries quickly eased, for she noticed that Mr. A was not looking at her body or the bodies of the other ladies. This means that his eyes cannot see through fabric directly. His sense of sight is exceptional. It's as if he's observing me at a close distance. With that ability, the hood won't achieve much. Audrey calmly observed the rest of the people engaging in their own deals, and got an understanding of the circumstances of some of the people there. At that moment, Mr. A's facilitator walked over and whispered to Audrey's group, You can write your requests on a piece of paper and pass them to me. Or wait till the break later to write whatever you want to sell on the blackboard in the small room. Furs took a whiff of her cigarette and surveyed the surroundings cautiously. Have you considered which Sequence 9 formula you want? She had kept her promise and told Audrey and Viscount Glaint about all the sequence pathways she knew of. Audrey pretended to think before saying, Spectator. I want to become a spectator. And I also want the advancement of Spectator the telepathist. She considered the fact that she would have to come into frequent contact with Furs and Zio Dericha in the future, making it highly possible that they would realize that she was a beyonder, a spectator. Thus, she decided to take this opportunity to reveal this to them and completely conceal the fact that the Tarot Club existed. Even though I'll be wasting some money, it'll still be worth it. Audrey praised herself. At the same time, she noticed that Zio Dericha was looking at the blackboards from time to time. Her expression was that of desire and depression. Zio told me that the corresponding Sequence 8 to Arbiter was Sheriff. She's looking at the £450 price tag? Well, it's obvious that she wants the formula for Sheriff. She's already been an Arbiter for more than a year, and she has been unknowingly acting the role of an Arbiter. Her potion should have been digested already. All these details tell me that Zio lacks money. As Audrey was deducing all of this, Viscount Glaint revealed his choice. Apothecary. I want the formula for Sequence 9 Apothecary. Feeling the gazes from Audrey, Furs and Zio, he explained himself with a chortle. To me, health and not having to worry about major illnesses and harm is the most important thing. A rational decision. I once dreamed of becoming an apothecary. Furs sighed while smiling. She had a rather languid demeanor. After making the decision, Audrey and the rest wrote their requests on pieces of paper and handed them over to the facilitator. They looked on as the facilitator made his way around the venue and asked the other participants, collecting several other slips of paper. This facilitator then shuffled the notes and handed them over to his partner in charge of the blackboards, asking him to transcribe the information onto them. I need the formulas for Potion Spectator and Telepathist. The price will be negotiated face-to-face. The facilitator would repeat the request 3 times after he wrote it onto the blackboard. If someone was interested, they could apply for a room in secret. There would be facilitators helping them complete the deal. After waiting for a while, Audrey and Glaint didn't receive a request for a deal. They were rather disappointed. At this moment, a facilitator walked over to Audrey's side and handed her a folded piece of paper. It's from Mr. A, the facilitator said softly. Audrey unfolded the slip of paper and took a look. Are you interested in the formulas of other Sequence 9 potions? Audrey curled the ends of her mouth disdainfully and wrote on a blank spot. I am only interested in Spectator. She folded the piece of paper and handed it back to the facilitator, then watched as he passed it back to Mr. A. Mr. A took a glance and didn't say anything, continuing to look over the rest of the members silently. But Audrey sharply noticed that he had secretly burned the piece of paper and allowed the ashes to fall to the floor. 15 minutes later, Mr. A said, Now we will have a break. You can interact with other participants freely. At this moment, the young man who sold Emperor Roselle's diary approached Audrey and said in excitement, I have already deciphered a portion of the Emperor Roselle's special characters and tattooed them onto myself, allowing me to gain some remarkable abilities. Are you interested? Audrey suddenly recalled that she had asked Mr. Fool if the special characters in the Emperor Roselle's diary possessed any unique abilities. Mr. Fool's answer was that they were useless unless a deity suddenly took interest in them. She looked at the young man in front of her and thought for a moment. She then probed, What remarkable abilities? The young man answered excitedly, I have become stronger and more healthy. Audrey looked at him in pity. I'm sorry, I have more trust in my own research. In the remaining time, she continued observing those who came to this gathering, but didn't obtain any more information. All she had was a rough deduction that some of them were doctors or lawyers, ordinary occupations. Audrey and the rest left the venue after another half an hour and returned to Viscount Glaint's mansion as they waited till the ball ended. Audrey returned home at about 10 that night. She was about to get her maidservant to prepare some hot water when she saw her dog Susie shoot her a look. My dog just shot me a look. Audrey's emotions became complicated. Chapter 132. Meeting the monster again, she found an excuse for her maidservant to leave them alone temporarily. Audrey locked the door and looked back at her golden retriever, Susie, who she wasn't sure could still be considered as her pet. You heard, or came across something. Susie sat steadily and howled, reverberating the air around her. Yes, I heard the Count's discussion with a few members of Parliament in the study. They said that the King and the Prime Minister came to a mutual agreement. They will give up their revenge plan on the Fasak Empire in Balam's east coast for the time being. Where's Balam's east coast? Susie's terrifying speed at grasping loan made Audrey feel mixed emotions. She fell silent for a few seconds before she said, I'll give you a map tomorrow. Okay, Susie replied in delight. The King and the Prime Minister believe that presently the most pertinent task is to push for the Reformation, which will allow civil servants to be selected via examination. They hope to pass the bill through the House of Lords and the House of Commons before October. Really? Audrey asked, pleasantly surprised. That was the first matter that she had managed to secretly guide after she became a spectator. Turning it into reality would give her a sense of achievement. Susie answered frankly, I can't give you a definite answer. This is just what I've heard. I couldn't even fully understand what they meant. After all, I'm a dog that just started to learn. Audrey was stunned for a moment before she beamed and said, Susie, you did well. This is your reward. She took out a bag from a lavish cabinet, tore open the seal, and placed it before Susie. It was a dog biscuit produced by the Backlund Pet Care Company, which was made of flour, vegetables, meat, and water. It was a snack that Susie really liked. Susie sat straight and sniffed. She waved her paw, seemingly deciding how she was to consume it to suit her present identity the best. After a few seconds, she gave up thinking, adhered to her instinct, and leaped forward. She grabbed the bag of snacks and ran outside. She stood on her hind legs and opened the door with one claw, then ran out and hid in the shadows and began enjoying her snack. On Sunday, Klein didn't wake up until the afternoon because he had spent the night on duty at Cheney's Gate. Klein took the trackless public carriage and arrived at Evil Dragon Bar. He had previously planned to use divination to find Monster Adamasol and determine the reason for his recent oddity. However, he was interrupted by the loss of control of a mandated punisher and could only reschedule it to today. He went through the billiard room and entered the underground market. Klein didn't need to search, for he immediately saw Adamasol shivering in a corner. When the pale-looking young man with black, messy, oily hair sensed Klein's approach, he suddenly covered his eyes and leaned against the wall in an attempt to move towards the side door. Klein quickened his pace and blocked Adamasol from leaving. He tapped the left molars twice secretly. In his spirit vision, Adamasol's aura appeared rather unhealthy. All the colors seemed dim. In other words, although he didn't have any major diseases, his body was very weak. At the same time, Klein realized that vibrant fear and anxiety were revealed in the monster's emotions. He had lost almost all of the blue that represented rational thinking. The surface of his astral projection extended from the depths of his ether body. The color was a unified, transparent, and colorless, just like a pure light. Is this the uniqueness of a naturally born monster? Klein nodded indiscernibly as he stared at Adamasol's face and said, What did you see recently? What did you come across? Why are you hiding in a corner and quivering while saying that there are all corpses, and that everyone is dead? Adamasol lowered his head and looked towards his toes. It seemed like he didn't dare to look directly at the person before him. He was shivering almost violently in his grayish-blue trousers and ragged linen shirt. He replied in a fluster, No, I didn't see anything. And no, I only had a dream. There's blood everywhere in the dream and corpses scattered everywhere. Haha, boo-hoo. I was among the corpses. I was there. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. He laughed and he cried. His reply confused Klein. Klein massaged his temples and lowered his voice to ask again, Why are you afraid of me? Adamasol was taken aback for a few seconds when he suddenly squatted down. He yelled in extreme fear. No. No. Everyone looked over, and Klein suddenly felt awkward. I didn't do anything to you. Why are you screaming as though something happened? He laughed dryly. He saw that Adamasol had curled up in a trembling fetal position. Besides begging for mercy, he didn't say anything else. Klein had no choice but to distance himself and pretend that he was just passing by. Maybe I should ask Mr. Azek for advice. But he just went on vacation to the northern part of the Fasak Empire last week, and he'll only return next Thursday or Friday. Before that, I have to first report to Captain. Klein covered his mouth as he yawned. He turned and left the underground market. After he got his salary that week, his private stash returned to £8.10 solely. However, truly rare Beyonder ingredients were so expensive that he could only window shop. Of course, if he wasn't afraid of the high interest, he could get a short-term loan from Swain. When he exited Evil Dragon Bar and waited for the public carriage, Klein considered the future developments. In another week, the £12 from my advance salary at the beginning will be cleared. The money that I bring home will finally reach £3 a week. Melissa will have no excuse about delaying the hiring of a maidservant. The other £3 will remain a secret, and I'll save up more money for myself. And I have to quickly get the telepathist formula or related clues from Daxter Guderian. I can use the excuse of giving an underling funds to exchange it for cash from Miss Justice. This could be done through an anonymous bank transfer. During the process, I'll cause interference via divination. That will be very safe, and it won't reveal my identity. After getting on a public carriage, Klein didn't head to the Blackthorn Security Company directly, but planned on heading to the Divination Club for 2 hours. It was part of the work needed to foreshadow his digestion of the potion. Plus, Klein was now considered famous in the divination industry. There were returning customers from the past, and there were also referrals. On average, he would have more than 10 divinations in an afternoon. Hence, even though he only went twice a week, he could still make a profit of £0.50. To the impoverished Mr. Fool, it was better than nothing. Sigh. It's a pity that I made it sound too good at the beginning and fostered too perfect of an image. I can't just change my divination fees as I wish. While sitting in the meeting room at the Divination Club, Klein thought to himself helplessly as he drank his Psy black tea. With his present fame, people would still seek his services even if he charged 4 solely. However, as a seer that respected fate, he could only continue to charge 8p. Although Klein had fully digested the potion, he wasn't willing to take the risk of going against the seer principles that he previously summarized. That included not obtaining excessive benefits from divination. After all, he didn't know if it would lead to losing control or other negative effects. The confidential information the Nighthawks had didn't include the concept of digesting. Thus, Klein couldn't determine if there was still risks after fully digesting the potion, or if he could do anything that was against the principle. Just as he was thinking about these things, the beautiful attendant named Angelica came in and walked over to him. She leaned down and softly said, "Mr. Moretti, someone wishes for your divination. Red Agate Room." All right. Klein had checked if it was a suitable day to visit the Divination Club before he came, and he had obtained a definite answer from his divination. He took his silk top hat, exited the meeting room, and saw his customer that was waiting at the door of the Red Agate Room. The customer was a maiden around 16 years old. She was wearing a light blue ruffled dress and holding a gauze hat of the same color. She had brown curly hair, a cute face with baby fat, and a pair of beautiful light blue eyes. Elizabeth. Klein recognized his sister's good friend Elizabeth, who studied at the Ivos public school. He had once helped pick an amulet for her, and also resolved Selena's magic mirror divination incident with her assistance. Similarly, Elizabeth said in pleasant surprise, "Mr. Moretti, it's really you? I was wondering if it was you when I saw the name. I am a mysticism enthusiast after all," Klein explained helplessly. Then he added, "Don't tell Melissa. Oh, Selena as well." The divination results showed that it was suitable for me to visit the Divination Club. Why did I run into Elizabeth? He shook his head as he turned around to open the door to the Red Agate Room. At the same time, he clicked his left molar twice. They entered the room slowly. After he took the seat of the diviner, he lifted his head to look towards Elizabeth. With just one glance, he creased his eyebrows. There was a faint layer of gloomy green in the maiden's energy field, a symptom of being haunted by spirits and wraiths. Klein made a calm judgment and asked directly, "Have you had nightmares recently, ones with repetitive elements?" Elizabeth, who had just locked the door and had yet to take a seat, was dumbstruck. It took her a long time to reply, "Yes, that's why I came here to look for you." Klein leaned back and asked, "What kind of dream did you have? When did it start?" "It began from the last 2 days of my vacation to Lamed Town. Oh, our family has an estate there." Elizabeth was considered half a mysticism enthusiast, so she had better memories of such situations. "In my dream, I always run into a knight in full black armor. He carries a huge broadsword and his face is fully covered by a helmet, so all I could see is a pair of glowing red eyes. In the dream, he keeps attempting to get closer to me. Afraid, I run away, but the distance shortens each and every time." Klein thought and asked, 2 or 3 days before you had such a dream, did you get in touch with any antiques, ancient ruins, burial objects, or a mausoleum?" Elizabeth recalled and answered, "I visited a mountain near Lamed Town. There was an abandoned ancient castle." "That's a standard opening of a paranormal novel." Klein lampooned silently as he pressed on. "Did you leave anything behind in the castle? Or did you take anything from the castle?" Elizabeth creased her beautiful eyebrows and answered moments later in uncertainty, "I got cut by brambles and bled. Does leaving blood behind count?" Klein nodded with a mask of solemnity and answered in a deep voice, "Yes." Chapter 133. Expensive Charms. Elizabeth immediately turned nervous after hearing Klein's reply. Subconsciously, she began to speak faster. "Can you help me divine the specific reason? It will be even better if you can divine a way to solve this. Divination can only give us a general direction of how to solve the problem. And furthermore, it will be unclear and filled with symbolism, making it difficult to decipher the hints correctly. Of course, you're very lucky. I'm not an ordinary seer. I'm a true mysticism scholar." Klein lampooned the girl's question before saying solemnly, "Since this matter has to do with dreams, I would suggest a similar divination method." All right. Elizabeth nodded her head like a hungry woodpecker. Klein maintained his professional attitude. "I will need you to sleep here and allow that dream to present itself. Is that a problem?" "There's no problem, I trust you," Elizabeth answered without hesitation while pursing her lips. But she quickly added with a stammer, But I cannot guarantee that I would have that dream." "It's just an attempt," Klein consoled her with a gentle smile. He then pointed at the long sofa on the side of the red agate room. "Please. No need for that, I'll sleep here." Elizabeth shook her head gently. She crossed her arms and said, "I sleep like this at school after classes whenever I feel tired." She used her arms as a pillow and leaned forward onto the edge of the table. "All right, you can pretend that I'm not here." Klein smiled as he observed the colors of her aura and emotions. He used them to deduce if the girl had fallen asleep or not. "Okay." Elizabeth closed her eyes and buried her face into her arms, trying hard to ease her breathing. Klein didn't speak as he leaned back into his chair. The room suddenly became unusually quiet. It was a peaceful silence, a silence that could make one forget their troubles. Sometime later, Klein took out a semicircular piece of silver from his pocket after he confirmed that Elizabeth had fallen asleep. The piece of silver was filled with indecipherable Hermes phrases, as well as symbolic imagery and numbers. It was a dream charm that Klein had succeeded in making the previous morning. He had also finished making 2 slumber charms and 2 requiem charms. The former were made with rectangular pieces of silver, while the latter were made with triangular pieces. This was to help him differentiate between them solely by touch during an intense battle. "Crimson," Klein softly recited the phrase in ancient Hermes. This was the activation incantation that he had set. Since there was still the step of injecting spirituality into the charm, there was no need for his incantation to be different from the rest. All it needed was to be short and easy to remember. The mysterious incantation reverberated around the room. Klein felt the dream charm become light in his hand, as if it had temporarily lost its weight. Klein immediately placed the charm on the table in front of him, after he injected it with his spirituality. A transparent flame leapt up silently, enveloping the charm, and became a deep, serene black. The black flame spread quickly, enveloping Elizabeth and Klein. Klein seized the opportunity to enter his state of cogitation. He used his spirituality to look at the illusory spherical light in front of him. The spherical light was surrounded by a boundless darkness, making it seem exceptionally lonely. Klein didn't dare delay any further as he emitted his spirituality, allowing it to touch the illusory ball of light. Silently, the scene around him started to coruscate and warp, but it quickly settled into a yellowish-brown plain. The plain was littered with the corpses of horses and humans. Fresh blood and weapons could be seen everywhere. Elizabeth was wearing a regal gown with engagiantes and a fishnet hat. She was looking around lost. She quickly saw Klein's figure and revealed a look of surprise and joy. "Mr. Moretti, we meet again. I had suspected that the Klein Moretti on the name register was you when Selena, and I came to get a divination. I came again multiple times, but always missed you as I had to attend lessons during the day. When I was free during the summer break, I was dragged to a holiday at Lamed Town by my parents. You can help me, right?" Klein froze for a moment when he heard the girl's talkativeness. To think that Elizabeth had suspected that I was working part-time at the divination club and tried to find me on multiple occasions. Yet, she didn't appear abnormal at all. Her surprise was authentic, masking her true thoughts. Indeed, everyone's dream shows their most honest side, other than me, Mr. Fool. As he was indulging in his thoughts, Elizabeth's dream changed. A tall knight about 1.9 meters in height was walking toward them, dragging a broadsword which was scraped the ground. This knight was dressed in black armor. The metallic sounds of metal colliding could be heard with his every step. Two blobs of red light akin to flames peeked out from the slit of his faceplate. They were staring at Klein and Elizabeth intently. The will of a wraith. Still not at the stage of an evil spirit. Klein, who was in his spirituality state, didn't need to activate his spirit vision. According to the classifications based on the Nighthawk's confidential information, the feelings of vengeance and injustice left behind by spirits were the weakest and easiest kinds of souls to deal with. Following those were shadows and wraiths. Evil spirits were the most difficult soul-like creatures to deal with. The most horrifying of evil spirits were said to be as strong as high-sequence beyonders. With this in mind, Klein took a step forward, blocking Elizabeth behind him. He then stomped down with his foot and shattered the dream. Multiple specks of light scattered like fireflies. Klein's spirituality returned to his body, allowing his eyes to once again adapt to the darkness of the red agate room. He saw the tools needed for divination placed around the table, as well as the dream charm that had almost finished burning. Klein felt the pinch when he saw this. Charms in the Evernight goddess's domain were all made using pure silver, so it pained his heart. Using these charms is akin to burning money. Even if I don't account for my labor costs, the materials alone already averaged to about 6 to 8 soli per charm. Well, he felt a little more at peace when he thought of the Beyonders from the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. After all, they burned gold. The corresponding metal for the sun was gold. Elizabeth groaned softly and slowly woke up before straightening her posture. She glanced furtively at Klein and asked, "Mr. Moretti, were there any results from your divination?" "Yes." Klein nodded seriously. "Your nightmares should disappear in no more than a week. I will report this to the captain and get him to send someone to deal with it at Lamed Town." Klein added in his heart, "Really? That's great. Thank you, Mr. Moretti." Elizabeth became excited. She then suddenly creased her brows. "What's the matter?" Klein asked in concern. "Nothing. I just remembered that I have to go home now." She slowly took out a single soli bill that she had prepared and placed it on the table. She then grabbed her hat and bade goodbye to Klein a little hesitantly. After leaving the red agate room, Elizabeth walked toward the stairs outside the door. She flailed her arms after she confirmed that no one was watching and groaned softly. "Pins and needles. How numbing." In the Blackthorn Security Company, Dunn rubbed his forehead as he looked at Klein. Did you suddenly return because you came across another supernatural incident? Hey, Captain, what's with that tone of disparagement? Klein cleared his throat and answered without hesitation, yes. What's the matter this time? Dunsmith rubbed his forehead again. Klein organized his words and replied, 2 things. For the first incident, I discovered Monster Adamasol hunched in a corner, shivering in fear when I was buying materials for my charms at the underground market. When he said that, he hinted heavily that he needed a reimbursement for the materials. Klein couldn't mention the fees for the detective he employed to find Daxter Guderian, for it involved the Red Chimney. He deeply regretted not employing separate detectives. Dunn seemed to fail to read between the lines as he nodded slightly. What happened to Adamasol? Klein exhaled silently and described in detail. Adamasol had a dream. He dreamed that there were corpses and blood everywhere. One of the corpses was his, and thus he became very frightened. Dunn thought for a moment before asking slowly, as a seer, what do you think it symbolizes? A disaster. A disaster that spans a wide area. But I have no information other than this. Furthermore, not everything in Adamasol's dream might have a symbolic meaning, Klein said while deliberating his words. I will report this to the Holy Cathedral and see what they have to say. Dunn shook his head and said in a self-deprecating manner, this isn't something I have expertise in. Klein didn't have any other ideas either. He changed the subject and spoke about the wraith harassment Elizabeth faced. Lamma Town. Is that lady a believer of the goddess? Dunn asked. Yes. Klein gave an affirmative answer. Then there should be no problems. Let's head over to Lamma Town now and try to get dinner there. Oh, and bring Fry along. His abilities should prove useful if the incident involves corpses and ghosts. Dunn massaged his temples and tried his hardest to contemplate whether he had forgotten anything. If Elizabeth wasn't a believer of the Evernight goddess, then they would have to hand her over to the mandated punishers, or the machinery hive mind according to her faith. If her faith didn't lie in any of the 3 major churches, then she would be handed over to the machinery hive mind, who were responsible for the outskirts. Klein didn't speak. He waited silently for a while before finally hearing Dunn add, also, we have 3 men on the mission. We can request to use sealed artifact 3-0782. 3-0782? After a minute, Klein recalled that the sealed artifact was called the Mutated Sun Sacred Emblem. This sacred emblem's beyonder influence seemed to be able to last a long time. It had the ability to constantly purify any corpses and spirits in a 15-meter radius. However, it had the drawback of purifying the soul of a commoner at the same time. Research data indicated that if a normal human were to stand within its radius for an hour, they would become an idiot that only knew how to praise the sun. The limit for beyonders was 6 hours. As for ghosts and corpses, they would scatter in less than a minute. To think that the captain would remember the codename for the sealed artifact. Damn, I feel that my memory is worse than his. Klein suddenly froze, nearly wanting to hang himself. Dunsmith leaned back and looked at Klein with his deep gray eyes. You went to the divination club again today. Did you feel any changes over the past 2 days? Chapter 134. It's been more than a minute, Captain. That's the exact question I wanted you to ask. Klein nodded seriously. I feel even better. I even believe that I can pass the Holy Cathedral's examination right now. It's a kind of feeling and confidence that can't be described with words. Realizing that his answer could be a little vague, he couldn't help but add, perhaps the name of a potion is really crucial. When I strictly followed the seer principles that I derived and acted as a fortune teller, everything became perfect and easy. Yes, I can now activate my spirit vision with an even more inconspicuous manner. Dunn creased his eyebrows slightly as the light in his eyes converged. He muttered seemingly deep in thought. The name of the potion. After about 10 seconds, he looked at Klein again. Do you need to return and inform your family? Sunday is the 2nd day after your duty at Cheney's Gate. You're supposed to get some rest. Taking into consideration the fact that Elizabeth was a good friend of his sister, and that he had promised that the problem would be solved within a week, Klein answered without hesitation. We don't have to waste time. After we set off, just get the carriage to take a turn by Daffodil Street. All right. Get Fry while I fill out the application form to get sealed artifact 3-0782 out. Dunn pointed at the break room diagonally opposite. Fry was a corpse collector, so he didn't possess the abundant energy of a sleepless. If he was free, he would take a nap. Filling in the application form yourself, approving it yourself, and collecting it yourself. Captain, our management system is quite flawed. Klein lampooned silently before he retrieved his hat and exited Dunn's office to knock on the door diagonally opposite. After Klein knocked thrice, Fry opened the door and looked at Klein with undisguised puzzlement. What's the matter? As he was taking a nap, his hair was messy and his shirt was untidy. His cold and gloomy temperament faded quite a bit. However, he still looks like a dead person that climbed out of his coffin. Klein hid his smile and answered seriously. There's a case that involves wraiths. The captain wishes for your assistance. Okay. Fry lifted his hand subconsciously to smooth out his messy hair, returning him to the cold person that kept the living at bay. After he dressed up, the two of them waited by the sofa in the reception hall. The surroundings warmed up after another 7 or 8 minutes, as though the area was being exposed to sunlight. Immediately following that, they saw Dunn Smith walk through the partition while he held in his hand an ancient badge about half the size of a palm. The badge had a dark gold luster and was engraved with the symbolic signs of the sun and lines that extended to the edge. It was the sealed artifact 3-0782 from the Intis Republic, originally named the Mutated Sun Sacred Emblem. The Intis Republic was the country that Roselle transformed from an empire into a republic before turning it back into an empire. Now, it had established itself as a stable republic and was located on the west coast of the northern continent. Its border with the Lone Kingdom included landmarks like Mid-Seashires, the Hornacis mountain range, and so on. Since the establishment of Intis as a nation, the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun had repressed the Church of the God of Craftsmanship, which later became known as the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. With it being the main religion of the country could also be referred to as the Kingdom of the Sun. Let's set off. Fry, you'll drive. Cesare can't withstand the purification of the sacred emblem for too long. Dunn reminded them calmly. Cesare Francis was a clerk who was in charge of purchasing and collecting supplies. He was also their driver, but he was just an ordinary person. He couldn't stay more than an hour within a 15-meter range of sealed artifact 3-0782. The journey from Zitland Street to Lamad Town, according to Klein's understanding, would require at least 2.5 hours. That didn't include the time to detour to Daffodil Street. All right. Fry didn't object, but checked if he had his personal items with him. When the rays of the setting sun dyed the pinnacle of the town's cathedral, the Nighthawk's carriage finally arrived at Lamad Town. The town was located at the northwest edge of Tingen. Many buildings still had the unique characteristics of the era before the age of steam. There were nearly 0 factories, and the nearby villages engaged in commercial trading. After they stopped the carriage, Dunn looked at the hair salon opposite and said, I asked one of the locals earlier. It only requires a 15-minute walk from here to the castle ruins on the mountain. It's said that it belonged to a feudal lord who ruled during the 4th epoch. However, no one knows what happened after that. Of course, their description is merely a local myth. Yes, let's go over now and deal with that wraith before the sky turns dark. Then, we can take turns to watch over 3-0782 and keep it away from commoners. From the moment Dunn retrieved the Mutated Sun Sacred Emblem, 3 hours had already passed. It was getting closer and closer to a Beyonder's limits. In no time, they would have to part ways and give each other time to recover. Okay. Fry gave a succinct reply. I have no problem about that. Klein touched the slumber charms and requiem charms in his pocket. The 3 Nighthawks and thin black windbreakers walked through the street in the town and headed toward the mountain when they reached a fork in the road. Along the way, the road was overgrown with weeds and clustered with shrubs, but it was still spacious enough to let 2 carriages pass side by side. It wasn't long until they saw a collapsed outer wall of an ancient castle. On the outer wall that was still standing, there were green plants crawling all over it while the exposed part was mottled. When he started to get close, Klein could feel a piercing chill as goosebumps formed all over his arms. There really is a wraith, Fry said monotonously as he looked at the ancient castle. Dunn looked sideways to steal a glance at the newly promoted Nighthawk. Then he laughed and said, "Don't worry. We have both 3-0782 and Fry. The wraith won't cause too much of a problem." He held his custom-made revolver in one hand, and the mutated sun's sacred emblem in the other. He took the first step towards the ancient castle that looked like a ruin. Klein followed closely behind, and prepared to pull the trigger at any time, swing his cane, or use his charms. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. When Dunn was less than 5 meters away from the ancient castle, where a broken horse stable, water well, and other fixtures were reflected in Klein's eyes, a cold breeze howled in a way that could only be described as sad and shrill. It seemed to be rejecting the uninvited guests. The 3 Nighthawks didn't stop. The warm and pure feeling gradually dispersed the chill and conquered the front of the ancient castle. They scaled the pile of rocks, passing through the collapsed outer wall before slowly entering the castle, which had lost its main entrance and was filled with broken tiles. The hall of the ancient castle was full of collapsed stone pillars and was covered with moss. It was spacious, but the windows were narrow and placed high on the walls. Hence, the lighting was poor. It looked dim and gloomy inside. That's also a trait of buildings from the end of the 4th epoch and the beginning of the 5th epoch. Klein, who was a historian, instinctively made a judgment and activated his spirit vision. Just then, an illusory yet piercing roar suddenly burst out. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, a thick cloud of black fog filled the air, resisting the infiltration of warmth and purity. A tall figure suddenly surfaced amidst the black fog. He wore full body, black armor, and carried a broadsword that a commoner would have found difficult to lift. The wraith looked identical to the one Klein saw in Elizabeth's dream. 2 flame-like balls of red light shone through the gap of his helmet, appearing cold, but they were staring at the 3 Nighthawks angrily. "You have disturbed my slumber. You will have to pay with your flesh and blood." He suddenly launched himself forward, and instantly shortened the distance to Dunn. He suddenly slashed downwards with his broadsword. Dunn retreated swiftly and lifted his hand to fire his revolver. Clang! The silver demon hunting bullet didn't manage to penetrate the illusory black armor, and only produced a crisp but unrealistic sound. Klein and Fry retreated to the side simultaneously. One held a gun in one hand, and aimed at the 2 balls of fire that took the place of the black-armored knight's eyes before pulling the trigger. The other Nighthawk transformed his eyes into a tranquil grayish-white and focused on the wraith. The black-armored knight roared in anger again. He took another huge stride towards Dunn and swung the broadsword horizontally. Bam! The broadsword didn't hurt Dunn, but it knocked him away, causing him to land heavily by the side of the door. It left him spewing a mouthful of fresh blood. With a loud thud, 3-0782 dropped on the ground. Since it was wearing a metal boot, the wraith eagerly kicked with its right leg and sent the dangerous badge out the ancient castle's door. It was a distance beyond 15 meters from it. Klein, who hadn't managed to shoot the wraith successfully, became nervous and puzzled when he saw that scene. It was as though he was overlooking the transformation before his eyes from a calm and rational position. Bang! He fired another bullet. The silver demon hunting bullet hit the wraith's helmet and produced sparks. But there was no obvious damage. "Right gauntlet!" Fry shouted. He was always cold and gloomy, but now his tone was filled with anxiety. No sooner had he finished talking, he lifted his revolver as well, and aimed at the wraith's right metal gauntlet. Bang! Bang! Klein shot subconsciously according to Fry's instruction, firing silver demon hunting bullets almost simultaneously with him. This time, the wraith didn't block it with his armor, but raised his broadsword and struck the 2 bullets away. Bam! He took a stride and charged at Klein, colliding with him directly. As Klein flew out, he saw his chest cave in, saw himself spitting blood, but he didn't feel uncomfortable, not one bit. He suddenly snapped out of his daze, fell on the ground, rolled about and screamed. Suddenly the ancient castle, the wraith, the collapsed pillars, and the moss floor shattered eerily. Everything returned to black fog in the air, just like when the black-armored knight first appeared. The only difference was that Dunn held both his fists tightly, bowed slightly, and his gray eyes were dark and deep. As expected, everything was just a dream. Captain pulled the wraith, Fry, and I into his dream at the same time. But I'm special, and I can remain clear-headed and rational. Klein realized that he was still standing 2 meters away to Dunn's right. He hadn't vomited any blood or screamed. Just then, Dunn stood up straight and looked at the wraith that was going to slash with his sword. He calmly said, "It's been more than a minute." The wraith was stunned and let out a shrill cry. Its body started producing black steam, as though it had just received its death sentence. Any zombies or spirits that had yet to turn into evil spirits couldn't stay within the 15-meter range of the mutated sun sacred emblem for more than a minute. "Holy shit, Captain, you're so cool." Klein looked at the scene from the side and nearly let out a cheer. Dunn had used his dream ability not to attack the wraith on his own turf, but merely to drag out the time. In the warm and pure feeling, the black steam evaporated quickly, and the chill dispersed gradually. In no time, the night became transparent and blended into the void. Clang! A black gauntlet fell to the ground, its surface covered with white frost. Klein was about to ask for the captain's go-ahead to pick up the drop, but when he looked over, his spirituality was suddenly disturbed. Somewhere near the stairs that separated the hall and the dining hall, there was an intense yet illusory misery and uncleanliness summoning him. Chapter 135. Portrait of a Baron. "There's some sort of problem there," Klein said with a serious tone, pointing at the steps separating the living room and dining room. He once read in the Nighthawk's confidential records that if similar situations appeared in one's spiritual perception, it usually implied that there was something evil and corrupted hidden at the target location. It was best not to interact with it if one wasn't confident, otherwise one might lose their life. Sometimes, even a mere glance could result in irreversible damage. Dunn looked over, and similarly, with his high spiritual perception, he immediately sensed something wrong. He turned to look at Klein and instructed calmly, "Divine and see if we would be successful in our investigation." Captain didn't get me to divine before we entered the castle. He was rather confident. That means that he believes that the hidden thing might be more dangerous than the wraith. Klein nodded in silence. He holstered his revolver and handed his cane to Fry. He then released the topaz bracelet within his sleeve, held the silver chain with his left hand, and silently recited a suitable statement. Instantly, his eyes darkened as a breeze started spiraling around him. The investigation of the hidden place in the ancient castle would be successful. The investigation of the hidden place in the ancient castle would be successful. After reciting the statement 7 times, Klein's eyes regained their normal color. He saw the dangling topaz rotating clockwise. It wasn't very obvious, but it was unmistakably rotating clockwise. That meant that the investigation would be successful. Klein, who was already a true seer, immediately nodded at Dunn and Fry. "The danger will be manageable by us, or there could be no danger at all." Dunn pinned the mutated sun sacred emblem to the left side of his chest, then pressed down on his hat. He briskly walked toward the steps and expertly started searching for a mechanism. Fry, who had picked up the gauntlet, handed Klein's cane back to him. He grabbed his revolver and cautiously scanned the surroundings, as if he was afraid that an enemy would suddenly appear. "I'm still not professional enough. As a Nighthawk." Klein geared himself up and took out his revolver, and turned alert as well. A few minutes later, it was unknown what the kneeling Dunn Smith triggered as heavy sputtering sounds emanated from the staircase. The floor split open, revealing a set of steps heading down. A cold and corrupted vibe emanated, seemingly condensing into something corporeal. Dunn glanced over and removed sealed artifact 3-0782 from his chest. He tossed it directly into the trap door. After a few clanks, it was unknown where the mutated sun sacred emblem stopped. If there are dead spirits within, they would definitely toss 3-0782 back out. That would be interesting. Klein stared at the stairs and waited patiently. The lingering sinister and corrupted feeling soon dissolved away, like snow meeting the sun. Warmness and purity blanketed the entrance of the trap door. Klein, go down with me. Fry will stay here and prevent other enemies from destroying the mechanism. Dunn made an experienced decision. All right. Klein didn't shrink back from the task. He took 2 steps forward and arrived next to Dunn. Fry nodded, not letting his guard down. Dunn went down first, his footsteps reverberating in the silence. He didn't prepare any sources of light. For a beyonder that went down the sleepless pathway, the darkness was not an obstacle, but a blessing. Their vision wasn't hindered by such an environment. After taking a few steps down, Dunn suddenly turned around and looked at Klein. I forgot that you don't have night vision. I'm not used to preparing objects that provide illumination. Captain, you don't need to mind about me. I have my spirit vision. Klein realized that he wasn't shocked at all. That cool captain from before was indeed not normal. In his spirit vision, the darkness before him was screened by a gray film. Even though it was very blurry, it was enough for him to make out where the steps were. Well, the captain sure is healthy, and his mental state is fine too. Klein carefully extended his feet and made his way down slowly. The flight of steps wasn't long. It only took about 15 steps to reach the ground. Sealed artifact 3-0782 was lying there, releasing its purity and warmth. It also radiated a faint glow. Klein could see much more clearly with the help of the illumination. He surveyed the surroundings and noticed that it wasn't a huge basement. It was no longer cold and sinister, but the dampness remained. In the middle of the basement was a black coffin, with dark red nails driven into the lid. The lid of the coffin had been pushed open slightly, allowing one to see a headless corpse that was all bone. Dunn looked around, then bent over to pick up the mutated sun's sacred emblem. Captain, this coffin, it was intended to prevent the dead within from becoming a zombie or a wraith. Klein looked at the dark red nails in the coffin and the formation they were in. He used his decent mysticism knowledge to determine that this was an ancient ritual to prevent anything the corpse from reanimating. At the same time, he muttered inwardly, but under normal circumstances, who would have nothing better to do than guard against their loved one from reanimating? The people who helped bury the corpse must not be family, and if they placed the coffin in the basement instead of a tomb, they must have been afraid of someone finding the corpse. Dunn, who had worn sealed artifact 3-0782 again, approached the coffin and inspected it. The deceased was probably poisoned to death. That means the person who poisoned him must have used ritualistic magic to prevent him from reanimating and seeking revenge. This should have happened about 1,300 years ago. He became a wraith in the end. The resentment of this spirit is simply shocking. Klein also walked in front of the coffin. Where is his head? That ritual does not call for the head to be sliced off. Dunn thought for a moment before saying, I have a deduction. This wraith didn't exist all the time, and only appeared recently. It's only a 15-minute walk from the town to the castle. Throughout the years, troublemakers must have frequented this place. But before this incident, there were no rumors of there being a wraith in this ancient castle. Klein nodded indiscernibly. Captain, what you mean to say is that someone came here recently, opened the coffin, and took away the head of the deceased? Yes, the ritual prevents the corpse from reanimating, but it also seals and preserves its resentment within the coffin. When the coffin was opened and the ritual dispelled, this resentment quickly evolved into a wraith with the help of its gauntlet. There's no corpse of the person who opened the coffin, so he's not an ordinary person. Besides, why did he take away the head of the deceased? Dunn stared at the skeleton in the coffin. For resentment to be preserved for such a long time, there should be some reason other than the ritual. He could have been a beyonder when he was alive, perhaps a descendant 1 or 2 generations removed of a mid-sequence beyonder. I am talking about the mid-sequencers as defined in the past, sequence 5 or 6. And such corpses are always special. His head might be usable in some kind of ritual, or in some other occasion. Dunn paused before continuing. What I said just now was all conjecture, but we can try to verify some of it. We can split up later in town and investigate to see if anyone was injured before in their youth. Well, if they are still alive, It would prove that the wraith only appeared recently. A logical train of thought, Klein praised. He quickly searched the basement, but didn't find anything else. He tried using ritualistic magic to make a sketch of the guest that entered the basement, but because it had been more than a month since it happened, as well as the disturbed environment due to the frequent appearance of the wraith, there wasn't much of a result. He then took Fry's place, allowing the expert on the dead to conduct further tests. 15 minutes later, as the sun was vanishing below the horizon, Dunn and Fry followed the steps and returned to the hall of the ancient palace. Dunn felt for the switch to the trapdoor, while Fry gave a short description. The deceased was indeed poisoned to death. The traces near the neck appeared recently, at the very most 3 months back. This means that it's highly probable that someone came here before. Klein nodded in thought. The 3 Nighthawks returned to Lamad town before it got dark, and asked for 2 rooms at an inn. The member that got the sealed artifact 3-0782 was to take this dangerous item for a stroll outside the town, where no one would be. They would change their shifts once every 2 hours, and thus only needed 2 rooms. After a simple dinner, Klein, Dunn, and Fry immediately split up and covered all corners of the town, asking the residents who had lived in this town for extended periods of time. In situations like this, their identification documents as policemen proved useful. "Officer, why are you asking this? I used to head to the abandoned castle to play when I was young." "Injured?" "Definitely. How could a child not have fallen while playing?" "I remember, yes. I've been cut by a sharp rock on the outer walls of the ancient castle in the past." A 40-year-old blonde man looked puzzledly at Klein, but answered his question honestly. This was the 14th person Klein had asked, of which 2 vividly remembered being injured in the castle when they were young. The captain's deduction is correct, Klein decided as he put away his identification documents. He smiled and said, "Thank you for your cooperation. I have no more questions." He was about to leave when the 40-year-old man called after him. "Officer, are you interested in the ancient castle? I have an oil painting of the first baron that resided in there. He was the grandfather of my grandfather of my grandfather. Well, anyway, it was a long time ago. He took away an oil painting from the castle and told me that it was the oil painting of the first Baron Lamad. Do you want it? It's a true antique. If it was a true antique, your family would have sold it a long time ago. This guy sure is gutsy, daring to fool even the police. Should I scare him with my gun?" Klein lampooned and adopted the attitude of a window shopper and said, "Who knows if it's a real antique or not? I'll trust my own judgment. Take it out and let me see it." The blonde man smiled and returned to the room and rummaged for it. Some time later, he walked out with the oil painting in hand. Klein casually looked at the oil painting. He saw that the Baron had gentle features and bronze skin, his eyes hiding an indescribable range of human experience. He was also wearing a white curly wig. He looks a lot like Mr. Azek. Klein's eyes suddenly opened wide, his gaze subconsciously falling below the right ear of the Baron. He then looked at the unremarkable mole near the ear. The position of the mole was exactly the same as Mr. Azek's mole. Chapter 136. The stumped Klein. This can't be right. How could Mr. Azek be the first in the so-called line of barons, Baron Lamad? This is a figure who lived 14 or 1500 years ago. No way. How can I be sure that the person in the portrait is the first Baron Lamad? Klein looked at the oil painting, his mind buzzing in confusion. It was like everyone around him had become monsters, or a dream where the entire world was filled with gods. He looked up and stared at the blonde middle-aged man. He extended his hand to grab his revolver from his armpit holster, and said in a deep voice, "This is not an antique. If you don't clarify the situation, I will arrest you and charge you with fraud." He didn't care if prosecution fell under the police department. His only goal was to threaten the man to get information. At the same time, Klein clicked his left molars twice to activate his spirit vision. Then, he looked at his target's emotional color changes. The blonde man jumped in fright and said in a panicked, muffled voice, "No, I'm not sure if it's an antique either. No, I heard that it's an antique, but I don't know much about such things. I really have no idea." I don't even know many words, words. His eyes darted around anxiously, seemingly about to cry for help. Just then, he saw Klein adjust his revolver's cylinder and hammer. He looked as though he was going to shoot a suspect that resisted. He suddenly stood straight and stopped looking around. Where did you get the oil painting? Klein asked heavily. The blond man's lips quivered as he said with a fawning smile. Officer, this is what my grandfather found in the ancient castle, more than 40 years ago. An outer wall, and the room on the second floor collapsed, revealing these items that people couldn't find in the past. One of them was the oil painting. No, not this oil painting. The original oil painting was torn and couldn't be preserved. So, my grandfather found someone to make a copy of the painting. The one you saw just now. I didn't lie to you. An oil painting from 40 years ago could really be considered as an antique. Are you sure that this is the portrait of the first Baron Lamut? Klein stroked the trigger and made sure the man's gaze didn't move an inch. The blond man chuckled and said, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing so. Reason? Klein nearly laughed at the man's shamelessness. Because there wasn't any labels on the oil painting. The blond man replied seriously for once. Just like I'm called the scoundrel Gray, my father is called the curly-haired Gray, and only my grandfather was the real Gray. Klein exhaled silently and asked, Where's your grandfather? In the cemetery. He's been buried there for almost 2 decades. Next to him is my father, who was buried 3 years back. The blond man answered honestly. After Klein asked a few questions from different angles, he adjusted the cylinder in front of the blond man and put it back into his armpit holster. He put away his police identification and turned around in his black windbreaker before walking towards the motel with his hands stuffed into his pockets. He walked quietly along the street underneath the dim light that was shining out from the houses that lined both sides of the street. I can't confirm if the portrait is that of the first Baron Lamut. I wonder if the town has the exact historical records of the ancient castle. Regardless, the man in the portrait must be a person from the past, at least 1,000 years ago. Besides the hair, he looks almost identical to Mr. Azek. Is this what we call reincarnation? Back when Mr. Azek gave up his position in other universities in Backland and came to Tingen, perhaps it was driven by instinct. There's another possibility, such as, the man in the portrait is Mr. Azek and Mr. Azek is him. Having thought of this, Klein felt a jolt. He nearly stumbled on the steps ahead. He paced back and forth around a damaged gas street lamp and tried to incorporate his knowledge from the world of information overload. According to his earlier guesses, he made a further inference. Mr. Azek might have become immortal due to some reasons, such as being a vampire. Could that be why he survived for so long? That's not right. When has there ever been a bronze-skinned vampire? Plus, when I shook hands with Mr. Azek, I could clearly feel his body temperature and the fresh blood that flows within him. Although he dislikes the heat of the south, he isn't afraid of the sun. He once competed in a rowing competition with other teachers under the hot sun. There's another possibility. Mr. Azek's sequence potion, or some other factors bestowed him with a long life, and the price for it is memory loss. Man, taking into consideration his various dreams, can I presume that he loses his memory as part of a cycle? Every few decades he forgets his past and gains new life. Then, his dreams are the lives that he has lived before. Haha. I think I've read something like that before in a novel. I can't just rely on divination to verify this. I have to look for the traces of the lives that Mr. Azek lived, traces of him not having a childhood, but starting directly as an adult. Klein started leaning towards his latter guess. However, he temporarily couldn't eliminate the possibility of reincarnation. He reined in his chaotic thoughts and considered carefully whether he should inform Captain Dunn about it. If Mr. Azek was a beyonder that lived for 1,000 years, his ability would be much stronger than I imagined. He advised me out of kindness. However, it would be hard to say if he will remain kind when I find clues about his past. But Mr. Azek has been nice to me all this time. To involve the Nighthawks would result in a non-trivial possibility of harming him. Sigh. It looks like I must divine this matter in the world above the gray fog. This is the most proper choice for a seer. Klein made the decision and returned to the hotel quickly. Since Dunn and Fry had yet to return, he seized the opportunity to get another room at the cost of one solely. After he entered the room, Klein made a spirituality wall with the assistance of holy night powder. Then, he took 4 steps counterclockwise, went through the mad ravings, and arrived above the gray fog. The lofty palace stood tall and silent while the ancient, mottled bronze table and 22 high chairs remained the same. Klein took the seat of honor and made a brown goat skin and black fountain pen appear before him. He picked up the pen and wrote seriously, "I should tell Dunn Smith about Mr. Azek." Then, he took the topaz pendant from his left sleeve and did a spirit pendulum divination. The spirit pendulum divination resulted in the pendulum spinning counterclockwise, which meant that he shouldn't tell him. Putting down the topaz pendant, Klein thought about it and decided to make an attempt with dream divination, just to be sure. Thus, he changed his divination statement to, "The result of hiding matters related to Mr. Azek from the Nighthawks." Klein held the goatskin, recited the statement 7 times silently, and leaned backwards to enter a deep sleep. He saw himself in the illusory, blurry, and distant world. He saw that he was struggling while drowning in a sea of blood. Then, there was a hand that extended and pulled him up from the blood sea. The owner of the hand was Azek with bronze skin and a small mole near his ear. The image shattered and reorganized. Klein saw that he was in a dark and gloomy emperor's final resting place. The surrounding coffins opened one after another. Azek stood next to him, looking forward, as though he was looking for something. Just then, Klein exited the dream in an instant and saw the illusory, gray, and boundless fog. The symbolic meaning of the earlier dream is that, if I were to hide the related matters about Mr. Azek, I would receive his assistance when I'm in danger in the future. The danger might have come about because I helped to keep the secret. What does the last scene mean? I will discover some mausoleum with Mr. Azek? Yes, perhaps the mausoleum has other symbolic meanings. Klein clasped his hands together and supported his chin while he interpreted the contents of the dream divination. Combining it with the earlier result of the pendulum divination, he decided to not report his inference to the captain, but merely bring up that a townsfolk had taken out a portrait of the first Baron Lamud, and that the portrait looked like a history teacher in Koei University. Klein couldn't be sure that Dunn wouldn't hear about it elsewhere, so he had to at least mention it. Of course, Dunn was unfamiliar with Azek and didn't know of his recount and strange dreams, so he would find it difficult to connect them. Klein even suspected that the captain wouldn't quite remember what Azek looked like. Then, he stopped thinking further and planned to leave the world above the gray fog. Just then, he noticed the crimson star that had been silent all this time was twinkling with faint light again. Klein extended his spirituality with interest and saw the young man that spoke Jotun again. He saw him kneeling before a pure crystal ball. The young man was still wearing the black tights that were different from the clothing of countries in the northern continent. His facial features were blurry and distorted, but Klein could faintly see his brownish-yellow hair. He knelt there and prayed with an unusual pain in his tone. Klein leaned sideways to hear. He relied on his beginner-level Jotun and barely understood what the young man was saying. "O magnificent deity, please cast your eyes on this land that you have forsaken. O magnificent deity, please allow us, the people of the dark, be freed from the curse of our destiny. I am willing to dedicate my life to you, using my blood to please you. A land that was forsaken, people of the dark, magnificent deity." Klein murmured the few key words, and suddenly thought of a place that the hanged man had mentioned once. The forsaken land of the gods. It appeared in Roselle's diary too. He even sent out a fleet to search for it, but it was fruitless. Klein squinted his eyes and wondered if he had guessed correctly. He tapped on the edge of the long bronze table with his fingers. After 3 taps, he came to a decision. He extended his right hand and touched the illusory crimson star. The cloud of crimson immediately exploded, and the light flowed in like water. Chapter 137, City of Silver Mortuary. Derek stood in front of a flight of stairs as he looked straight ahead with reddened eyes. In front of him were 2 coffins containing his parents. Embedded in a stone plate in front of him was a simple silver sword. The frequent booming of thunder caused the house to shake, and the sword to sway. The Berg couple inside the coffins weren't completely dead yet. They struggled to keep their eyes open while making weak attempts to heave for air. But in the eyes of some, the luster of their lives could no longer suppress their irreversible darkening. "Derek, do it!" An elder dressed in a long black robe looked at the youth and said in a deep voice with a staff in his hand. The expression of the youth was visibly contorted. "No, no, no." Derek, who had brownish-yellow hair, shook his head repeatedly. He took a step back with every word, and finally let out an ear-piercing scream. Thump! The elder struck down his staff and said, "Do you wish for the whole city to be buried along with your parents? You should know that we are the people of the dark, who have been forsaken by God. We can only live in a cursed place like this, and all the dead would become horrifying evil spirits. There's no way to reverse it regardless of what we do, other than ending their lives by the hands of a family member." Why? Derek asked in despair, shaking his head. "Why are the citizens of the City of Silver destined to kill their parents the moment they are born?" The elder closed his eyes, as if recalling what he had experienced in the past. "This is our destiny. This is the curse we must bear. This is the will of God. Draw your sword, Derek. This is a show of respect for your parents. After this, when you have calmed down, you can try becoming a divine blood warrior." In the coffin, Berg tried to speak, but he could only let out a groan after his chest heaved several times. Derek took several steps forward with great difficulty, returning to the side of the silver sword. He extended his shivering right hand. His brain registered the cold touch of the metal, causing him to recall the blood ice his father brought back when he went hunting. Blood ice the size of a mere palm was enough to keep his home cool for a few days. Images flashed past his eyes. His stern father teaching sword techniques, his friendly father patting away the dust on his back, his gentle mother mending his clothes, his brave mother stepping in front of him when they encountered a mutated monster, and finally, his family huddling in front of a flickering candle and sharing food. A faint sound croaked from his throat despite his utmost suppression. With a low grunt, he exerted force with his right hand and drew the sword. Tap, tap, tap. He lowered his head and charged forward, raising the sword and driving it down with force. Ah! Blood splattered following a pained scream. The blood splattered onto Derek's face and into his eyes. His vision became red. He pulled out the sword and pierced it into the coffin by the side. After the sharp metal pierced through flesh, Derek released his grip and wavered as he stood up. He didn't look at the condition of the people inside the coffin. Derek stumbled as he ran out of the mortuary, as if he was being chased by evil spirits. His fists and teeth were clenched tight. The blood on his face left streaks across his face. The elder who had taken in everything from the side. There were stone pillars that lined the main streets of the City of Silver. Atop the stone pillars were lanterns, and within the lanterns were unlit candles. There was no sun in the sky here, no moon, no stars. Only an unchanging darkness and lightning that threatened to tear apart everything. The citizens of the City of Silver walked along the dark streets with the illumination of the lightning. The few hours when the lightning died down was considered by them as the true night, as mentioned in the legends. That was the time where they had to use candles to light up the city, drive away the darkness, and make it serve as a warning for the monsters. Derek made his way along the street. He didn't have anywhere he wanted to go. But as he walked, he realized that he had reached the door of his house. He took out his keys and unlocked the door. He saw the familiar sights, but he didn't hear his mother's concerned voice, or his father reprimanding him for running about. The house was empty and cold. Derek clenched his teeth again. He walked quickly to his room and searched for the crystal ball. His father had told him that this was a crystal ball used by a long-destroyed city to worship their deity. He knelt and faced the crystal ball, praying without any hope in mind. He pleaded bitterly, "O magnificent deity, please cast your eyes on this land that you have forsaken. O magnificent deity, please allow us, the people of the dark, be freed from the curse of our destiny. I am willing to dedicate my life to you. using my blood to please you. Over and over again, just as he was in complete despair and about to stand, he saw a dark red glow burst forth from the pure crystal ball. The glow was like flowing water, instantly swallowing Derek. When he regained his senses, he realized that he was standing in a magnificent palace supported by giant stone pillars. In front of him was a long ancient table, and on the other side of the table was a human figure obscured by a thick fog. Other than that, there was nothing around him. It was empty and ethereal. Under him was a boundless fog, and incorporeal dark red specks of light. Derek felt a flame of hope ignite in his heart. He stared at the human figure at the very top, confused and puzzled. Are you God?" After asking this, he suddenly remembered a statement he read from a book in the City of Silver, and quickly lowered his head. That statement was, "You may not look directly at God." Klein leaned back as he crossed his hands. He adopted a relaxed posture, and answered using the language of the giants Jotun. "I am not God. I am merely the fool who is interested in the long history of this world." Klein had already activated his spirit vision by clicking his left molars. He noticed that the youth in front of him had different colors covering the surface of his astral projection and the depths of his ether body. This meant that he was not a beyonder. "The fool." Derek ruminated over the term and, after a long silence, said with difficulty, "I don't care if you're God or the fool, my prayers will not change. I hope that the people of the City of Silver will be freed from the curse of their destinies. I hope that the sun and sky described in the books will appear in our skies. If possible, I wish that my parents can be revived." "Hey, I am not a wishing well." Klein put down his hands and laughed. "Why should I help you?" Derek froze. He thought for some time before saying, "I will offer my soul to you. I will use my blood to please you." "I have no interest in the soul and blood of a mortal." Klein smiled and shook his head. He saw the color of the youth's feelings turn into the color of despair bit by bit. Without waiting for the youth to speak, Klein nonchalantly said, "But I can give you a chance. I am a fool that likes a fair and equal exchange. You can use what you can attain to exchange with me, or people like you, to exchange for things you want. But remember, they must be equal in value. This can make you powerful. Perhaps one day, you can rely on your own strength to free the City of Silver from its curse, and make the sun appear in your sky once again." Based on the youth's description, Klein was confident that the City of Silver was the so-called forsaken land of the gods. Of course, he couldn't be certain of this for the time being. After all, the religious literature claimed that the world existed in a sunless state during the first epoch, the Chaos Epoch. No one knew if there were any other strange lands that the countries of the northern continent were unaware of, other than the forsaken land of the gods. Derek listened quietly. He lowered his head in silence and replied after a while, "I want to become the sun. I wish to obtain the formula of the corresponding starting sequence potion from you." Sequence potion, the sun. The sequence pathway that the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun possesses. From the looks of it, we exist in the same world. The term sequence was born from the revelation of the first blasphemy slate, which happened at the end of the second epoch, the Dark Epoch. In other words, if the City of Silver is really the forsaken land of the gods, this means that it was split apart from the southern and northern continents at the end of the second epoch. Could this be related to the cataclysm of the third epoch? According to the legends, the Evernight goddess, Mother Earth, and the god of combat descended upon this world and protected humans from the cataclysm along with the Lord of Storms, Eternal Blazing Sun, and the god of knowledge and wisdom. Klein obtained a fair bit of information from the youth, but he had trouble interpreting what the youth was saying, and even more trouble organizing his words, as he wasn't fluent in Jotun. Luckily, ancient Fasak was derived directly from Jotun. Klein could be described as an expert in that area, and thus, he could master Jotun relatively quickly, preventing him from making a fool of himself. Klein maintained his posture. He replied with a calm tone, "We can discuss this transaction in the future. Do not go out for the next 2 days. Try your best to not be in the same room as anyone else." He didn't know the unit of time used in the City of Silver, much less the time difference it had with the Lone Kingdom. All he could do was generalize it as tomorrow, and wait until the tarot gathering was over before he told him that was the time for future meetings. Klein knew that there was a term for day in the Jotun, and thus deduced that the youth would understand even if the City of Silver didn't use it as a measure of time. "All right, I'll follow your instructions," Derek replied with his head lowered. He didn't have any objections. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He tapped his fingers on the side of the table and said, "Before I send you back, let me first complete our equal exchange. I gave you a chance to be strong, and you have to give me something equal in return. I have said that I am the fool who is interested in the long history of this world. What I ask in return is the history of the City of Silver, everything that you know." Derek thought for a moment before replying softly, "I will describe it faithfully. The City of Silver has existed ever since the omnipotent and omniscient God, the Lord that created everything, forsook this land. No, it existed before that, but it was called the Kingdom of Silver." Chapter 138. Giant Pathway. The omnipotent and omniscient God, the Lord that created everything. Klein leaned back and maintained a profound posture while he ruminated over the words that the youth from the City of Silver had said. He was no stranger to a Lord that created everything. The Creator mentioned in the Book of Storms, the Revelation of Evernight, and other urban myths referred to the Creator with similar titles. It was also the way various secret organizations like the Aurora Order described the true Creator. But this was the first time Klein was hearing of an omnipotent and omniscient God in this world. Be it the Evernight Goddess, Lord of Storms, and the God of Steam and Machinery, none of them claimed to be omniscient or omnipotent. If the City of Silver was really in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, then the Forsaken Land of the Gods would truly belong to this world. The omnipotent and omniscient God might be the title of the Creator that was used by the living in ancient times. Klein looked towards the young man opposite him and thought. He looked at the emotional colors of pain and sorrow. When Derek felt the fool's gaze, he lowered his head involuntarily. He recalled the legends that his parents had told him. He said slowly and sadly, "When the sun disappeared from the sky, when the clouds were ripped and torn apart, when lightning and thunder became our rulers, and the monsters lurking in the dark suddenly emerged, ones so terrifying beyond one's imagination, they destroyed one city after another in the Kingdom of Silver. Humanity's dark ages had arrived. The remaining experts in the City of Silver then relied on their united power and 2 magical items before they finally warded off the attack of the things of the dark. They gradually eradicated the monsters within a 1-day journey of the city, and they established a city-state that protected the last light of human civilization." A standard textbook description. Klein couldn't help but comment in his head. The young man's description made him feel that the City of Silver was in a different world than the northern continent. Maybe this is the unique characteristic of the Forsaken Land of the Gods? He thought, without revealing his emotions. Derek calmed his breathing and continued. During the first few decades, plants couldn't grow. The City of Silver had a severe lack of food, and we could only hunt dark creatures or mutated animals to relieve our hunger. The population dropped drastically. Fortunately, we found blackface grass. It could survive under such circumstances, and it became our only reliable and stable food source. It was said to be the final intervention that the magnificent God left for us. It allowed one generation after another to live on in the City of Silver. It persisted in the Dark Ages for 2,582 years. The passage of time was recorded by a long line of chiefs. For the rest of the people in the City of Silver, we call periods of frequent lightning day, and when the lightning subsides, we call it night. It's a rather confusing system, and it makes exact dates difficult to pinpoint. Such a magical place. Klein was glad that he hadn't talked about tomorrow, but instead vaguely mentioned the following 2 days. Derek briefly talked about the few memorable incidents in the City of Silver's history and said, when the population returned to a certain level, the number of Beyonders increased. The 6-member council started forming elite troops to explore the dark. We have now explored all of the original territory and nearby cities. We are advancing towards the darker and more terrifying depths of the dark. At the border, we found cities with strange architectural style, but they were destroyed at some point. We suspect that they were sanctuaries built by other remaining humans. Unfortunately, they still lost to the things of the dark in the end. The things of the dark that he mentions should be a reference to monsters that hide in the dark, ones that are beyond imagination. Klein nodded indiscernibly. The Kingdom of Silver was once ruled by the Giant King. Hence, the Beyonder chain that we are in control of is the Giant Pathway, also known as the Divine Blood Warrior Sequence Pathway. When we killed certain monsters and explored those destroyed cities, we obtained potion formulas of other sequences. However, the sequence pathways are incomplete, Derek said, moving on to explain the current situation in the City of Silver. Upon hearing that, Klein's mind jolted. Although he didn't change his posture much, he was obviously paying more attention. I love knowing more about sequence potions. The Giant King, the City of Silver, and the Northern Continent share the same history? The second epic's history. Killing a monster causes it to drop a formula? Is this a game? No, there's another possibility. Those monsters were once human Beyonders. Klein suddenly felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. Derek saw that the fool didn't reply. He clenched his teeth, pondered, and said, "The names of the giant sequence pathway are Sequence 9 the Beyonder Warrior, Sequence 8 Gladiator, Sequence 7 Weapons Master, Sequence 6 Dawn Paladin, Sequence 5 Guardian, and Sequence 4 Demon Hunter. Only the elders in the 6-member council know the names of the higher sequences. Sequence 4 Demon Hunter. This is the name of a high sequence potion formula? This is the first time I've heard something like this." Klein felt delighted at the fact that he finally learned one of the names of the higher sequences. However, he suspected that it was a name from ancient times, which would be different from the current version in the Northern Continent, just like the Windstorm Priest and the Seafarer. Oh, Beyonder Warrior, Gladiator, Weapons Master. Sounds familiar. Oh right, the sequence pathway that the Church of the God of Combat has in control is very similar to this. Sequence 9 Warrior, Sequence 8 Pugilist, Sequence 7 Weapons Master. Due to the limits of his security clearance, Klein only knew the titles of the first 3 sequences that the Church of the God of Combat had in control, but the similarity between the 2 pathways was still obvious. Based on the core meaning, they are basically identical. The complete sequence that the Church of the God of Combat mastered is the so-called Giant Sequence Pathway. It is said that there was a god that emerged in the 3rd epoch, which was the Cataclysm epoch, to inherit the estate of the Giant King? Or could it be that he himself was an ancient giant? Klein analyzed and judged while he maintained his calm appearance. Derek continued to explain. After we pulled through the initial hardships, the City of Silver has been ruled by a 6-member council ever since. The elder that enjoys the highest position in the council is called the Chief. The other 5 are equal in rank. The current 6-member council is formed by 3 demon hunters, 2 guardians with the greatest potential, and a shepherd. The City of Silver has 3 high-sequence Beyonders. Demigod-like experts. These 3 alone could destroy the Tarot Club 100 times over. Klein felt a little afraid. He had yet to attempt recruiting someone under the nose of a high-sequence Beyonder. However, since the young man was just a mere commoner, with him not even at Sequence 9, it was unlikely that he would gain the attention of the upper echelons for a long time. Thus Klein relaxed again. Is Shepherd from another sequence pathway, perhaps from one of the incomplete pathways? Sounds reminiscent of the style of the Aurora Order. The member from the Aurora Order that wrote a letter to Mr. Z. What was his name again? He kept mentioning the Lord's Lamb. Klein maintained his leisurely posture and asked casually, Shepherd? Yes. This is a sequence pathway that we found from a city that the things of the dark destroyed. It only reached Sequence 5 Shepherd, but Elder Norwaya is very strong, very strange, and very scary. It is said that she once won against an evil spirit at the level of a high sequence Beyonder, without getting injured. Therefore, when there was a vacancy in the 6-member council, they made an exception for her. Derek, feeling a little fear. Klein thought, then smiled as he asked, What's the sequences before Shepherd? I find them familiar. As you know, a sequence's historical name and its current name is always different. In the City of Silver, the names of potions have never changed, Derek refuted instinctively. He then lowered his head and said, Sequence 9 Secret Suppliant. Indeed, Klein was satisfied when his guesses were confirmed. This is the name of Sequence 9 from the Aurora Order. Chapter 139. Studying 3-0782. After the crimson light in front of him dissipated, Derek Berg saw his room once again. He saw the pure crystal ball in his hands. Crack! The crystal ball shattered from the inside. Some of it turned into pieces of illusory beams of light that flew into the void around him, while the other crystalline fragments fell noisily to the ground. Derek looked on dumbfounded. He could see the traces of blood on his face reflected in the bronze mirror. He noticed a crimson light spiraling on the back of his right palm, forming a circle with lines extending out from the edge. The strange symbol bore into the back of his palm and vanished. Derek fell into a daze in the time it took several flashes of lightning to illuminate the sky before snapping to his senses. He looked at the fragments of the crystal ball on the ground, then looked at the back of his right hand as his gaze turned deeper. He walked out of his bedroom, returned to the living room, and opened the door to look up at the sky above the City of Silver. An arc of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the city with a silver sheen. Right on the heels of that was rumbling thunder. The world belonged to the dark. Without any speck of light, the heavy darkness only left people in despair. Derek clenched his fists. There was no joy in his eyes, for they were still filled with the remnant grief and pain. But he was no longer lost. Phew, looks like I've managed to trick another person into becoming a member. No, I've managed to recruit another member. Klein shook his head and mocked the present strength of his tarot club. The leader, the fool, was only a Sequence 9, one who had just fully digested the seer potion. And there were at least 3 high sequence beyonders at Sequence 4 in the hopeless City of Silver that the sun spoke of. After mentioning the acting method one more time, I can start telling the captain the specifics and hand in my special application. At the very least, I'll stop being in charge of support once I become a clown. Klein didn't stay in the world of fog. He extended his spirituality, wrapped it around himself, and initiated a descent. Tearing through the gray fog and passing through the ravings, he returned to his room before dispelling the wall of spirituality. Then, Klein picked up the key and headed out of the room. He first went to the 2 rooms booked by Dunn to take a look in order to confirm that the captain and Fry hadn't returned yet. He then headed to the first level and handed the key back to the boss. The boss looked at the wall clock to the side and gave a thumbs up. Well done. Hey, are you mistaken over why I booked an hourly room? Klein wanted to explain himself, but finally decided to leave the misunderstanding as it was. Feeling wronged, he tried to console himself. Yes, this way, he won't mention that I rented another room in front of the captain. After heading out and going through the motions, Klein did a quick divination and returned to the inn based on the results. He headed straight to the second floor to find Dunn and Fry discussing their investigations in one of the rooms. Just as he expected, we can confirm that the wraith appeared within the last 3 months. Dunn summarized to Klein with a nod as he came through the door. Klein immediately echoed, "My investigations also confirmed it." He highlighted the main points of his questioning and concluded, there's a townsfolk named Scoundrel Grey, who claimed that he had the portrait of the first Baron Lamud. He said that it was an antique oil painting more than 1,000 years old. Don't tell me you bought it? Dunn's eyes shimmered as he was taken aback before he asked, "Captain, do you think that I'm so stupid to be fooled that easily?" Klein gave a dry laugh. "No, I didn't. Even though I'm a history student, I have attended some lessons on archaeology and have some degree of experience in this area. I can more or less determine if something is fake." The person in the portrait looked a little like my history teacher, Mr. Azek. He casually mentioned the most important piece of information. And indeed, Dunn didn't pay too much attention to it. He massaged his temples and said, "This is a small town near a historical site. There will always be a myriad of antiques here. I just saw a vendor selling the silver wine glasses of Baron Lamud." Someone tried to sell me the insignia of the Lamed family, claiming that it had been dug out of the castle, Fry added. Klein subconsciously asked, "Did you guys buy them?" Fry and Klein looked at each other and didn't continue with the subject. The next mission is for you or Fry to take sealed artifact 3-0782 out of town to somewhere uninhabited. Otherwise, a good half of the people in this will become idiots blathering praises of the sun. Are you going first or Fry? Dunn looked at Klein with his deep gray eyes. Me. Klein raised his hand slightly and smiled. It's still quite early, so I can come back and have a nice sleep later. We're doing 2-hour shifts, right? Yes. Fry, go over with Klein and confirm where you'll exchange the sealed artifact. Dunn turned to look at corpse collector Fry. He had already found an opportunity to hand sealed artifact 3-0782 over to Fry when they split up to conduct their investigations. Otherwise, he would have been purified and started praising the sun. Fry hadn't had enough time to recover and could only hold the item for another 3 hours. All right. Fry took out the mutated sun sacred emblem from the inner pocket of his black windbreaker and handed it over to Klein. Klein took the item with a fair bit of curiosity and interest. The metal was warm to the touch, as if hot water was flowing within it. The warm, gentle glow was like a ripple, spreading outward in waves and bringing with it a pure smell. At the same time, Klein felt that the dark golden sacred emblem, carved with the symbol of the sun, was cleansing his spirituality, removing the impurities and leaving it pure. Of course, all sealed artifacts have their dangers. Death might occur if one isn't careful enough. It's even possible to have a fate worse than death. He muttered to himself as he placed the sealed artifact 3-0782 into his inner pocket. After inspecting his revolver, charms and cane, he walked out of the room and left the inn together with Fry. They headed straight for the outskirts of Lamed town. The two circled an area beside a sparse and deserted forest and confirmed that there was no one within dozens of meters of them. Chase away anyone who approaches you, Fry coldly reminded. I'll come to take your place in 2 hours. Sounds good, Klein replied with a smile. After seeing Fry enter the town, he found a tall boulder he had eyed previously. He picked up some leaves from the tree beside him and wiped the surface of the boulder. He then touched the top of the stone with his finger and inspected the stone under the light of the crimson moon. After confirming that it was clean, Klein put on his black windbreaker and sat down. Why stand when you can sit? Klein thought to himself. After a few minutes of silence, he looked at the dark, quiet, and rather scary forest. He couldn't help but stand up, taking out several metal bottles from his hidden pockets and scattering their contents, herb powder and essential oils, around the boulder. Klein recited an incantation in Hermes. With the help of the materials, he created a barrier of spirituality, sealing the area he was in. He did this simple ritual for 2 reasons. First, he didn't want to rely too much on his premonition for danger, as a seer, to defend against corpses and spirits launching a sneak attack against him. The second reason was to keep the bugs away. This is 100 times better than insect repellent. Klein sat back down satisfied. After sitting there for a few minutes, Klein took out sealed artifact 3-0782 out of curiosity. He began a detailed inspection of the mutated sun sacred emblem. I wonder if I could use divination to find out its origins and how it became special. He took out the pen and paper he always had on him and wrote a statement. The origin of the mutated sun sacred emblem in my hands. As a qualified and true seer, Klein had made the preparations needed to divine anywhere. After reciting the statement 7 times, he closed his eyes and entered a state of cogitation, using that as a launch pad to propel him into his dreams. All he saw were fragmented pieces of light in his dreams. Other than that, he didn't learn anything else. Yes, the church must have gotten other seers to attempt the same thing in the past. The fact that there is no mention of its origins must mean that there was no result from the divination. Just like what happened just now. Klein sighed. He then thought, I wonder what would happen if I eliminate the interferences? This thought immediately filled Klein's head, pushing his curiosity to a peak. After more than 10 minutes of hesitation, he stood up. He decided that it was fine since there was no one around, considering how he was in a secluded area of the forest. He took 4 steps counterclockwise inside his wall of spirituality before entering the world above the fog once again. Klein sat at the seat of honor of the ancient table in the magnificent palace. He conjured a few sheets of yellowish-brown goatskin and a black fountain pen, as well as the mutated sun sacred emblem. It feels rather real. He rubbed sealed artifact 3-0782 in his hands, finding the tactile feedback identical to the one he had felt in the outside world. It instantiates itself based on what I felt? Klein mumbled to himself before writing down the statement he had come up with previously. The origin of the mutated sun sacred emblem in my hands. After reciting the statement 7 times, he held the piece of goatskin and sealed artifact 3-0782 in his hands. He leaned back and entered his dream. In the blurry dream world, Klein saw a drop of glowing gold liquid. It was warm and bright. It was suspended above an altar, before a man dressed in a white classic robe. The man only had his back facing Klein. He had lost all signs of life, as he fell slowly towards the sacrificial altar. At that moment, the sun sacred emblem he was holding had come into contact with the golden liquid, the latter quickly seeping into the emblem. The dream quickly dissipated after Klein saw this, waking him up. So it was because of the golden liquid that this sacred emblem has been so effective and uncontrollable to this day. Decades have passed since the discovery of this emblem, but its cleansing powers haven't declined. I wonder what that golden liquid was. Some advanced beyonder ingredient? Klein toyed with the sealed artifact 3-0782 in his hand and slipped into deep thought. After deliberating over it for a few minutes, he tried to emulate the feeling he had in the dream. He wanted to separate the golden liquid from the mutated sun sacred emblem he had conjured. He accomplished it almost immediately as the thought came to him. Klein looked in shock at the emblem, which was no longer warm or pure. He watched as the drops of golden liquid silently suspended themselves in the air. He had even more praises for this mysterious space above the fog. This is practically a miracle, even if the separation and instantiation here isn't real. The origins of this drop of golden liquid. He penned down a new statement with great excitement. Chapter 140. Expert at Courting Death. The origins of this drop of golden liquid. After reciting the divination statement 7 times, Klein held onto the goatskin and the illusory golden liquid before leaning back in his seat. He didn't know if he could divine with the item that was instantiated based purely on a feeling. All he could do was make bold assumptions and carefully seek confirmation. In seconds, Klein's eyes darkened, turning from brown to black as he entered a state of cogitation. His eyelids drooped down and he saw the illusory yet blurry dream. In the blurry world that looked in shambles, a golden, glaring sun suddenly appeared. A low grunt resounded across the void. The pure and clean light suddenly lit everything up as the gold and burning flames swept outwards. Boom! Klein was instantly expelled from his dream world and flipped onto his side as he shivered. His body seemed to become a huge bonfire which burned with a raging flame. At that moment, his thoughts were all over the place. No proper idea could form from the chaos in his mind. Rumble! The mysterious space above the gray fog shook violently, and the lofty palace collapsed inch by inch. The ancient mottled bronze table broke into a few pieces. The terrifying changes only continued for 3 seconds before the world above the gray fog returned to tranquility as though nothing had happened. The gold flame on Klein gradually extinguished. He rolled around on his charred skin as he groaned in pain, until he eventually regained his ability to think. He supported himself on the armrest of the high chair and stood up with great difficulty. He was terrified and confused about what had just happened. He had never imagined that a mere divination would result in such consequences. He panted and lifted his head to survey his surroundings. He realized that the lofty palace and ancient bronze table, which looked like they had stood unchanged since ancient times, had been damaged. In the world above the gray fog, which had never experienced any abnormality, it was simply an unprecedented level of damage. What happened? Did my divination point towards some unfathomable existence? Klein calmed down slightly and let his burned flesh shed while he speculated. If I wasn't protected by this mysterious space above the gray fog, there might not even be ashes of me left behind. Could that drop of gold liquid be the blood of a god? Did I see the eternal blazing sun? Or some powerful angel of his? No, that was the sun, so I think it was the former. Damn, did I just look directly at a god? Klein felt more fear as he thought about it. He felt that he had nearly died. Those who know nothing fear nothing. But those who don't court death won't die. In the future, I can't just divine anything and everything. Who knows what I'll see? If that were to happen once more, I don't know if this mysterious space could even shelter me from fatal damage. When that happens, I'd actually die. Yes, it definitely won't do if I continue making experiments with the golden liquid. The existence from before, which was likely eternal blazing Sunday. He must have sensed the sudden, hidden and unexpected influence from the divination above the gray fog, and failed to respond in time. If he were prepared, this mysterious space might not have been able to withstand the repercussions. Having come to this realization, Klein's body had already returned to normal. It was no longer charred, but compared to before, he was dimmer and more incorporeal than before. He lifted his hand to massage his temples, and commanded with his mind to restore the palace and the long table. Then, the palace that looked like the home of a giant, and the long table cast out of bronze returned to normal. Everything looked like it had before. Klein sat down and leaned against the back of the chair. He mocked himself and said, "Well, this isn't entirely bad. At least I know the limit of the mysterious space, and I have a certain goal. Only powers approaching the angels of the gods can completely influence the power of the area above the gray fog. Sigh. I have to add another new rule to my seer principle. Do not randomly divine things that involve a high-level entity. Yes, I shouldn't hastily activate my spirit vision either. If I were to look directly at things that shouldn't be looked at directly, it might be game over. In the outside world, I don't have the mysterious space to fend off most of the negative effects." After a while, Klein's expression turned odd, because some knowledge was reverberating in his head. Yes, knowledge. In the short time he had spent with what appeared to be eternal blazing sun, Klein was constantly in his divination state. Hence, he could instinctively divine certain matters and knowledge from the being that he was looking at. He quickly used a dream divination to recall and organize what he had gathered. That wasn't his primary objective. He picked up the black fountain pen and wrote one line after another. 1. Do not look directly at God. 2. Pure white angel. 3. The technique of making a flaring sun charm. It's a relatively high-level charm in the domain of the sun. Its potency can last a year before it deteriorates. There's no need for a ritual to pray to the eternal blazing sun. But the procedure requires the sealed artifact 3-0782 to take the ritual's place. It will siphon power from the mutated sun sacred emblem. 4. Extremely hostile towards Lord of Storms and God of Knowledge and Wisdom. 5. Bard Potion Formula. Main ingredients: a crystal sunflower or an adult flint bird's tail feather, or a firebird's tail feather. A piece of siren rock or a singing sunflower. Supplementary ingredients: a blade of midsummer grass, 5 drops of July wine juice, a blade of elf dark leaf. 6. Light Suppliant Potion Formula. Main ingredients: a piece of brilliance rock or powder of dazzling soul or blood of a mirror hedgehog, or the heart of a magma titan. Supplementary ingredients: a golden-edged sunflower, 3 drops of aconite juice. 7. Priest of Light Potion Formula. Information of main ingredients missing. Supplementary ingredients: 5 grams of rosemary, 7 drops of fingered citron juices, rock water. 8. Sequence 4, Unshadowed Potion Formula. Main ingredients could be the golden blood of God extracted from the mutated sun sacred emblem. It could also be replaced with 3 adult sun divine bird's tail feathers, and a piece of holy brilliance rock. Information of supplementary ingredients missing. After writing down the 8 lines, Klein couldn't help but rap the edge of the long bronze table. He had gained way more than he imagined. He was already satisfied with surviving his reckless divination earlier, but now he had received an unexpected survival reward. From the confidential information he received from the Nighthawks, he knew that the sequence pathway that the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun held was called Sun, and its sequence 9 was barred. It would allow the Beyonder to imbue courage and strength for themselves and their allies through their singing, a job that brought about devotion and submission. Their slogan was "Let us praise the sun." The corresponding sequence 8 was Light Suppliant. They could cast spells and hold rituals from the sun's domain, which were very effective against corpses and spirits. Sequence 7 was called Solar High Priest, which greatly enhanced the spells and rituals within its domain. In other words, I have obtained the complete potion formulas of Sequence 9 and Sequence 8 in the Sun sequence pathway. Yes, unlike before, the potion formula even lists replacement items and ingredient names from different eras, as expected of formulas obtained directly from Eternal Blazing Sun through divination. Klein thought in satisfaction. He had originally planned on seeing if the Hanged Man could solve the request of the young man from the City of Silver. After all, the Church of the Lord of Storms and the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun were the most ancient orthodox sections. They had fought against each other for thousands of years, so it would only make sense for the two churches to have learned the initial sequence of each other's pathways. The Hanged Man might not have cared about the Sun pathway previously, but since he is very likely a Sequence 7 seafarer, it would probably be easy for him if he really needed to gather the information. However, I don't need him now. I solved it myself, through an unbelievable yet extremely dangerous method. Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, my son friend. Your fool nearly turned himself into a charred corpse. Klein lampooned silently, while still feeling a lingering sense of fear. He lowered his head and looked at the records on the goatskin before him. He thought of another formula. Would the Priest of Light be an ancient name of Solar High Priest? The confidential information of the Nighthawks never mentioned it, and my divination didn't pinpoint the sequence number. Is it Sequence 6 or Sequence 5? Sequence 4 unshadowed. This is the first high sequence formula that I've obtained. It's such a pity that it lacks the supplementary ingredients. I wonder how I can fill in the blanks. I can't believe that drop of golden liquid is really the blood of a god. Sealed artifact 3-0782 is probably far stronger than anyone imagines. From what I can see, it's sufficient to become a grade 1 sealed artifact. Yes, it's likely that the Nighthawks from before only determined whether the item has any traits of the living, how much danger it would cause to nearby humans, how difficult it is to control the item's effects, and if it can be used against corpses and spirits. They had no way of discovering its unique origin. The mutated Sun sacred emblem can probably even fight against evil spirits. How could the examiner find an evil spirit to experiment on? As an official Nighthawk, I can't become the owner of sealed artifact 3-0782. But yes, I can find an opportunity to make a flaring sun charm and siphon its power? Sigh. I certainly can't do it now. I haven't prepared the necessary ingredients. Why would I, a Nighthawk of the Evernight Goddess, carry the ingredients of the sun around with me? Klein massaged his forehead regrettably. He saw that there was no other movement in the world above the gray fog, and finally relaxed. He confirmed that the Eternal Blazing Sun hadn't managed to track him down. Do not look directly at God. Do not look directly at a high-level entity. I must remember this. Why would the Eternal Blazing Sun be extremely hostile towards the Lord of Storms and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom? What the hell is a pure white angel? As these mixed thoughts filled his brain, Klein felt the emptiness and an aching pain in his head. Plus, he felt that too much time had passed. He had to return to the outer world, just in case someone discovered anything amiss. Back then, he thought it would take a minute or so to divine 2 or 3 times in the mysterious space. Plus, there was a spirituality wall isolating him from everything else. Once it was touched, his body in the world above the gray fog would sense it. Hence, he felt utterly safe. But he hadn't considered the possibility of having some sort of accident. In the end, he nearly lost his life, and that wasted quite a bit of time. Due to the fact that he was afraid that he would be greeted by a light of purification beam, or discover that the mutated Sun sacred emblem was damaged, he enveloped his body with spirituality, before he stimulated a descent with his heart in his mouth. The crimson moonlight reflected in his eyes, and there was a darkness hidden within. Klein saw the sparse forest and the weeds before him, as well as the intact sealed artifact 3-0782 in his hands. After a few seconds of breathless anxiety, he finally believed that he was safe. Phew! Klein let out a breath of relief. He felt exhausted after his insane probing at the border of death. Chapter 141. Nightmare. The exhausted Klein dispelled the sealed wall of spirituality, allowing the cool wind to blow onto his face. The scent of grass and trees that the wind carried revitalized him. He rubbed the warm and classic sealed artifact 3-0782 with his hands and sighed to himself. Who would have thought that there would be a drop of God's blood in this emblem? I have to assume that the experts from the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun must have tried searching for this item in the past, but couldn't find it. Klein stretched his neck. He didn't dare try anything else, keeping the mutated sun's sacred emblem in the inner pocket of his windbreaker. His hand followed a chain and took out a silver vine-leaf pocket watch. He opened it to see that there was still about an hour before Corpse Collector Fry's shift. I need 2 matches to prop up my eyelids. This is a side effect of that near-death experience. Klein didn't have any other ideas. All he could do was take out a small metal bottle from a tiny hidden pocket. He uncapped the bottle and brought it near his nose. A pungent smell, a mix of mint and disinfectant, quickly entered his nose, giving Klein goosebumps. His senses were jolted, making him forget his fatigue temporarily. He had learned the formula from Corpse Collector Fry. It was called Quelaag's oil, and it could help a person ignore the stench of rotting corpses, as well as refresh and clear the mind. The next hour felt like torture. Klein paced around from time to time, and was bitten by the mosquitoes in the forest several times. Finally, he saw the black-haired, blue-eyed Fry walking out of the town wearing a windbreaker and holding a cane. Even though Fry still looked like a living corpse, Klein felt as though he was looking at his savior. He covered his mouth and let out a yawn, making his eyes teary. He made his way over and took out sealed artifact 3-0782 from his pocket. What happened? Fry asked as he looked at his partner's pale face. Klein sighed and said, I just did my shift at Cheney's Gate the previous night and didn't sleep too well in the morning, so I'm very tired. He didn't elaborate further and changed the subject. Shall I come for my next shift 4 hours from now? 7 hours. The captain doesn't need sleep at night. Fry took the mutated sun's sacred emblem. I'm glad someone enjoys staying up late. Klein ridiculed the captain under his breath. He bade goodbye to Fry and walked towards the town. On the way back to the inn, he took out his pocket watch again and checked the time. 10 minutes earlier than we arranged. What a nice person. Klein laughed and walked faster. He returned to the inn and opened the half-closed door. The boss watched him as he made his way to the second floor before he entered his room. He removed his coat and shoes after locking the door. He didn't wash up, but instead fell directly onto the bed. His breathing became heavy in just a few seconds, then long and peaceful. In his dreams, Klein returned to Earth where he was playing a game he hadn't beaten. A cup of soda and a plate of spicy chicken wings were on his left. To his right was a bowl of rice and bitter bamboo shoots meat soup. He didn't like bitter bamboo shoots, but he liked it in soup with meat slices. The refreshing taste and the little bit of fat from the meat were tantalizing, a perfect complement to the rice. He could eat an extra bowl of rice if it was paired with some good sauce dip. Just as Klein was about to enjoy his supper and continue playing his game, his dream changed again, presenting him with the internal layout of 2 Daffodil Street. Klein suddenly became alert, aware that he was dreaming. He saw himself seated at the side of the dining table, a copy of the Tianjin Daily Tribune in his hand. In front of him was a bowl of tomato oxtail stew, pan-fried lamb chops, mashed potatoes, and wheat bread. He subconsciously turned to look at the door, suddenly noticing a figure standing outside the window of the living room, silently staring inside the house. Klein was shocked. He immediately recognized the gray-eyed Dun. Half his face was clinging close to the window as he silently watched the people inside. Captain, Can you not scare someone in their dreams? Is this your way of acting as a nightmare? Klein thought, finding humor in his exasperation. He scooped up a mouthful of stew and put it into his mouth. This is my cooking, he sighed to himself. He understood why he suddenly became alert in his dream, why the scene of him on Earth vanished. He would naturally become aware when someone barged into his dreams. At this moment, Dunn left his spot by the oriel window and directly entered the house. In his black windbreaker, he came silently before Klein. He took off his hat and nodded before sitting down. He didn't stand on ceremony, picking up cutlery and quickly polishing off the stew, lamb chops, wheat bread on the table. Klein looked on dumbfounded, unsure what the captain was doing. Phew. Dunn exhaled in satisfaction and gave Klein a thumbs up. He then took out his pipe and a matchstick before taking an intoxicated puff. He exhaled a cloud of smoke and stood up. He then put on his hat and bowed before leaving the house and the dream. Klein looked at the captain's back, unable to collect himself for a long time. He looked down at the empty plates and instinctively wanted to conjure up the food he had just now. But this time, the oxtail stew, lamb chops, mashed potatoes didn't appear in his dream. It was completely eaten. A nightmare can do that. Klein twitched his lips and thought in frustration. So the captain's goal was to prevent me from eating supper in my dream? That sure is a nightmare. This method of acting as a nightmare sure is creative. He let out a laugh and exited his dream, once again falling asleep. At about 5:30 the morning the next day, Klein, who had no choice but to wake up early, drink his coffee and eat his toast and bacon. He hurried out of town to take over from Dunn. At 7 in the morning, they prepared to set off back to Tianjin. It wasn't even 10 when they arrived at 36 Zitland Street. Fire sat behind the typewriter after Dunn, the most energized of the lot, returned sealed artifact 3-0782 to the back of Cheney's gate. He took advantage of the fact that the clerks hadn't arrived yet, so that he could write a report on the mission and the claims of the related expenditures. Klein looked on from the side, satisfied that the items he had expended were within the list, including the materials he used to drive the bugs and mosquitoes away. He didn't return home immediately, for he had arranged to meet the asylum's Dr. Daxter at 1 in the afternoon at the agreed-upon venue through a coded letter. Then there's still the tarot gathering at 3. Why does the boss of a secret society have such a tiring life? Klein thought to himself. He took a 2-hour nap in the Nighthawk's break room to catch up on sleep. He didn't forget the information he had obtained the previous day. He wasn't worried that he would forget, for the information could be recalled using divination. He was afraid that he would disregard the existence of this information and even lose the ability to divine the information. Thus, he recalled the pieces of information once again before he slept to reinforce them. This was also the reason Klein insisted on doing a review every week and reorganize all the information he knew. After lunch, he took a look at his pocket watch and left the Blackthorn Security Company for the shooting club at 3 Zitland Street. Klein entered the reception area after pushing open the door, but he didn't head directly to the shooting range belonging to the Nighthawks. Instead, he found a seat in the hall as he waited patiently with his black cane in hand. He had arranged to meet Daxter at the Zitland Street Shooting Club. He had arranged this through handwritten letters. Whenever Klein needed to meet him, he would write to Dr. Daxter Guderian, in place of a patient's family member, and ask about a unique condition called dissociative identity disorder. In his letter, Klein would use various methods to mention the term spectator, as well as a hidden mark of ink to authenticate his identity. The letter would also casually mention a time to meet. As for the place to meet, they had already decided this the first time they met. If Klein felt that there was a need to change the location, he would mention it when they met in person. When Daxter Guderian needed to meet for non-urgent matters, he could send a letter to the Hound Pub or the Shooting Club. The recipient would be marked as Mr. Hornaces, which Klein would take at scheduled times. In urgent situations, he could hand the letter directly to the boss of the Hound Pub, Wright, and mention his search for mercenaries. This way, Wright, who was an associate of the Nighthawks, would immediately hand the letter over to the Blackthorn Security Company. After waiting for a while, Klein saw the refined Daxter enter the shooting club a few minutes past 1. He was wearing a black hat and a fitted tuxedo. He had a cane inlaid with silver in his hands, as well as a pair of gold-framed spectacles on his face. Daxter walked around the club without attracting attention and saw Klein, who nodded slightly. He then retracted his gaze and walked to the counter, expertly applying for a shooting range and renting a gun. This was not his first visit. Small shooting range 7, 3 solely an hour. The fee for renting a revolver is 1 solely 7 pence per hour, and it contains 6 rounds. The receptionist quickly settled the request. After Daxter confirmed that he was renting the items for an hour and paid the fee of 10 solely, he took the revolver and extra bullets and was led into the respective shooting range by the facilitator. Klein waited another 5 minutes before slowly standing up. He grabbed his cane before walking to the small shooting range 7 and knocked on the door. The door opened a tiny crack with a creak. Daxter first looked around cautiously, then opened the door fully. Klein immediately entered and locked the door. "Good afternoon, Mr. Daxter," he said as he took out a 10 solely bill. He handed the bill over to Daxter. "We wouldn't let our associates bear any extra fees, because I can claim compensation," he added in his heart. Daxter didn't decline. He took the cash and asked heavily, "Mr. Moretti, why did you ask to meet me?" Chapter 142. Association. Klein obviously couldn't just bring up the telepathist formula right at the start. However, he didn't hide his intention either. After all, the man opposite him was a spectator. He wouldn't be conned so easily. "Has Hood Eugen behaved unusually recently?" He first asked Daxter Guderian about the patient in the asylum, who was a member of the psychology alchemists. Daxter examined Klein's eyes, expression and gestures. He thought and said, "No, he's acting normal. Frankly speaking, I think if he really wanted to leave the asylum, he could immediately behave in a very healthy and very normal manner. But he hasn't done so, and he continues to stay in the asylum. He appears to be treating every patient. Yes, patients who exhibit chaotic, violent, or abnormal thoughts appear to be getting better. Maybe Hood Eugen is trying to train his beyonder powers with this method." Psychiatrist, sequence 7 that corresponds to spectator? Perhaps even higher. Since Hood Eugen isn't a doctor in the asylum, but entered as a patient, it means that he hasn't truly grasped the acting method. It should be as Daxter has guessed. He's probably training his beyonder skills, and doing so resembles that of the acting method. To a certain extent, it could slow down the potion's negative influence. Hence, Hood Eugen decided to just take the asylum as his home. Klein openly showed that he was in deep thought regarding Hood Eugen's matter, because that would make Daxter Guderian feel that he knew and understood a lot, making him appear unfathomable. With this in mind, Klein guessed something else. The psychology alchemists hadn't grasped the acting method. After all, even a mainstay member at the Sequence 7 was unaware of this. In this era with few beyonders, a Sequence 7 was considered mid-level in any secret organization. They were important enough to know crucial matters, especially those that could help members resist the loss of control. Plus, the Psychology Alchemists was a secret organization that had only been established in the last 300 years, or even earlier. It was understandable that they hadn't grasped or deduced the acting method. The only organization that brought up the method explicitly was the Secret Order. They were an ancient organization that had more than 1,500 years of history and could be traced back to the previous epoch. Hey, the Church of the Goddess is even older than the Secret Order. Just the letter of saints from the Revelation of Evernight clearly indicates that it's nearly 3,000 years old. That's not to mention the mythical legends before that. How could such an ancient church not discover the acting method? During the long history of a huge organization, there must have been members who experimented with various possibilities, just like Spirit Medium Daily. They might not have understood the principle of the acting method in detail, but they acted out the name of the potion correctly anyway. They would have discovered the gist of it through the good feedback they received, as that accumulates through the generations of Nighthawks, unless the higher-ups were a bunch of curly-haired baboons. it would be impossible to deduce the acting method. Klein's thoughts made the connection, and was suddenly shocked. To the Nighthawks who didn't know of the acting method, someone like Spirit Medium Daily was a genius, an example that an ordinary member couldn't emulate. Hence, no one suspected that the experience of Daily and others could be adapted for their own use. But to those who have grasped the acting method, this would be extremely odd. Klein believed that in the long history of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, Spirit Medium Daily was definitely not the first member to have used the acting method to digest the low-sequence potions quickly. She might not even be in the top 10 or top 50. It doesn't make sense. Unless Daily didn't understand the acting method on her own, but had other people's guidance. Then, it could be concluded that every member of the Holy Cathedral follows the beliefs of the past, believing in their predecessors' experience, and not daring to rebel against their teaching. After all, rebelling would imply the loss of control most of the time. Yes, other than this explanation, there is another possibility. The higher-ups of the church have hidden the acting method, for some reason. I need to flip through some records and search for examples of Beyonders in the Church of the Evernight Goddess, digesting their potions quickly, as well as their final outcome. Klein thought with a mask of solemnity. Daxter looked at him, waited for a few minutes and asked curiously, "Officer, is there some sort of problem with Hood Eugen's actions?" "Not right now. It just made me think of other matters," Klein replied, smiling. He cast his suspicions aside. He asked instead, "Has there been any actions taken by the psychology alchemists recently?" "No, besides a small gathering in Awa to exchange items and experience," Daxter answered honestly. Klein nodded slightly and said, "How about your own situation?" Daxter controlled his expression as he replied, "Not too good myself. I still hear some ravings and have some illusions. If I wasn't a doctor specializing in mental health, I might even think that I have some sort of disorder." As he spoke, his face grew solemn. "I followed Hood Eugen's in your instructions to ignore those illusions and ravings. That made me feel much better, but they still affect my sleep, and I have become more grumpy and short-tempered. I'm not like myself, as though another new me is growing from within. Or maybe it could be described as a new character. I'm very worried and terrified that I might suddenly lose control one day." Just as I have predicted, I didn't even need to divine to see that coming. Having prepared for this, Klein smiled and said, "You don't have to worry. You're a subsidiary member of the Nighthawks now. There are benefits for you. As an ancient organization, we master many methods to keep one from losing control. It isn't 100% effective, but it will definitely help you. Besides, I'm willing to share with you my personal experience. You must know the man standing before you only used a month to shake off the shackles of illusions and ravings, and they haven't resurfaced. You should know from Hood Eugen and your other cadres that doing so is very difficult." For Sequence 8 telepathists, Klein bragged a little. "Officer, there's a bit of a lie in what you said, but it's mostly the truth," Daxter suddenly said calmly. "What do you want from me?" "It's tough to lie to a spectator," Klein replied with a smile. "It's not something that only I want to get. Miss Justice wants it too." Of course, he knew that Daxter would definitely assume that the Nighthawks squad wanted something. "If your method is really effective, and the items or information you want is within my reach," Daxter weighed his words as he spoke. "I will give you the perks in advance," Klein said straightforwardly. "We want the telepathist formula." He wouldn't hide the potion formula, but inform the captain as well. He would tell the captain that Daxter used it in exchange for his personal experience on bringing the potion under control. During the procedure, Klein would definitely verify the formula and accidentally memorize it in his head. Besides, he would use the fact that he used his personal experience in exchange for the formula to earn merit with the Nighthawks. By then, with his previous merits, he might not even need to put an extra effort to apply for the clown formula and main ingredients. A formula for 2 deals, quite a good bargain, Klein thought happily. Daxter looked into his eyes and kept quiet for a while before he said, "You're very frank. I'll try my best to get the formula, but I'm not sure how long it'll take me. If it gets too dangerous, I hope that I can replace it with something else." "No problem. Klein didn't intend to force the request on the man. He then described the acting method vaguely. The key to resisting the loss of control lies within the name of the potion. We have to understand it and learn its true meaning. You can't completely understand it by thinking about it. It must be understood through experience. For instance, as a spectator, you have to understand that you're only a spectator, not an actor. How a spectator should act is something that you need to discover through attempts and experimentation to deduce the principles required of you. From there, adhere to it strictly. Daxter listened attentively. Then he replied, "That's a brand new way to look at things." I'm willing to use the word theory to describe what you just said. This is just like a theory of a play and opera. I'll try and I hope it'll help. If it really works, I'll do my best to get you the telepathist formula. May the goddess protect you. Klein drew a crimson moon on his chest. Klein didn't request the potion formula of psychiatrist as well, because he knew that it was a task that Daxter couldn't complete with his current position. He might end up exposing him if he wasn't careful. Thus, he planned to take it one step at a time, by helping Daxter achieve a higher position in the psychology alchemist slowly. Then the long-term benefits would be abundant. Klein looked outside through the peephole in the door. Then he left quickly and turned to the small shooting range that was designated for the Nighthawks. He entered and locked the door. His face grew grave once again. When he was guessing the reason why the Church of the Goddess hadn't developed the acting method, he realized another thing that he had overlooked. He had overlooked it because he had obtained two crucial factors in reverse order. It made him fail to make a further consideration. The first matter was that the Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. The second matter was that the Antigonus family had the seer sequence in its grasp, or at least most of it, as there was a very long period of time between when Klein learned the two facts. He almost didn't piece them together. Hence, he overlooked something that should have been pretty obvious. Since the Antigonus family had grasped a majority of the sequences of the seer pathway, how is it possible that the Church of the Evernight Goddess only received sequence 9 seer? They should have obtained more than that as the spoils of war. If a member from the Aurora Order got a hold of the clown formula from the Antigonus family's magical notebook, then what about the church that destroyed the entire Antigonus family? Even if the Antigonus family was well prepared and hid their most valuable things at the highest peak of Hornacis Mountain, the Church of the Evernight Goddess shouldn't have gained so little. They were the ones who killed the family members of Antigonus family. Furthermore, the dead can be made to speak. Chapter 143. The fool's real-time. Klein paced around the small shooting range as he pondered over the intent of the Church of the Evernight Goddess regarding the seer pathway. Do they not want Nighthawks to choose this pathway? Or do they not want Beyonders to become powerful through this pathway? As such, they only revealed the sequence 9 seer, which is clearly a support type. Captain also mentioned that the Holy Cathedral might have the subsequent recipes. No, they didn't even provide the names of the potions for sequence numbers 8 and 7 in the confidential information that I read. They merely described the battle characteristics of each sequence. In other words, they don't want those under them to realize that the church might hold the actual formulas. Is there a possibility that Nighthawks who chose this pathway could become vengeful spirits for the Antigonus family, and thus, the higher-ups of the church made a decision like this? Or could there be some other reason? Klein suddenly felt incredibly suspicious, a sense of intense wariness and vigilance towards the higher-ups of the church. He began reconsidering whether he should openly hand over the special application to become a clown. If there are some terrifying secrets behind this, wouldn't I be jumping into the fire myself? Frankly, I'm not a person that can be placed under strict investigation, but the Tenjin branch has handed the clown potion formula over to the church. Any seer who learned of this would hope to advance. Isn't that normal? Sequence 8 is still considered a low sequence, so it shouldn't invite too much attention. The only problem is that I would only take a month to completely digest the potion and submit a special application. If the higher-ups are familiar with the acting method, they would be able to realize what I did immediately. Of course, I do have an excuse. I know spirit medium daily after all. Old Neil, who is strict in abiding by the mystery prior's maxim, is also my friend. The claim that I gained inspiration from them and refined the acting method isn't too hard to believe. Yes, even Daly received attention from the higher-ups only after showing signs of digesting a Sequence 7 potion in 3 years, and is now being nurtured to become a future archbishop. Being at the stage of clown shouldn't garner me too much attention, unless I fully digest the clown potion in a few months, giving them confirmation to believe that I have truly mastered the acting method. In other words, applying for the clown potion isn't a risky move. I can continue with that plan, but I should pay attention to this in the future. I'll have to take things one step at a time. I'll do a divination back at home. Klein collected himself and took out his revolver from his holster before carrying on with his daily shooting practice and maintenance. The quality of the revolver that he had gotten from his schoolmate, Welch, was unexpectedly good. Without any surprise, it would last for quite some time. Of course, he had to credit Dunn and Leonard for teaching him how to maintain a revolver. To be honest, it doesn't matter if it's damaged. These are all things I can request compensation for. Klein looked at the target, put away his revolver, and left the shooting club. He took the public transport back to 2 Daffodil Street. Before arriving at his destination, he saw a young lady pacing about his door. This lady was dressed in a blue lacy dress, as well as a thinly veiled hat. She was Melissa's classmate, Elizabeth, who had her adorable baby fat. She quickly approached when she saw Klein arrive, taking off her hat to reveal her joyful face. She paused for 2 seconds before smiling. "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. I'm guessing that you just came back from Lamad Town, right?" "I'm sorry, I came back in the morning." Klein smiled. "No, I came from Zitland Street." Yes, that was a very honest answer. He laughed to himself. Elizabeth froze for a moment, then said with excitement, "All right, I guessed wrongly. I came to look for you, because I wanted to tell you that I didn't have that nightmare last night. I no longer dreamed about the knight in black armor. This was exactly the same as the result of your divination. Of course, that wraith was completely purified by sealed artifact 3-0782. I couldn't channel his spirit even if I was there, much less your dream." Klein laughed and replied gently, "I'm happy that you're freed from your troubles. I'm also very satisfied with my divination yesterday." Thank you once again. All right, I have to go now. I still have lessons in the afternoon. Bye-bye, Mr. Moretti. I'll visit Melissa when I have the time." Elizabeth left joyfully, renting a carriage by the side of the road. As the carriage began to roll forward, she smiled and thought proudly, "Melissa definitely doesn't know how great her brother is. It seems as though my explanation just now was useless. Young ladies would rather trust their intuition and the truths made up in their minds." Klein saw Elizabeth board the carriage and opened the door to his house. He made his way to his room. He rested for a while before he began to consolidate everything that had happened over the past week, including the questions he had yet to resolve. After completing the task, he burned his notes, took out his pocket watch and opened it. 2:30. There's another 15 minutes left. Seeing that he still had time, Klein put on his oldest suit and headed to Smyron Bakery at Iron Cross Street to buy a cup of sweet iced tea from Mrs. Wendy. He drank his beverage as he returned, then sealed his room with a wall of spirituality at 15 minutes to 3. He then took 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the world above the gray fog. In the quiet ancient palace, Klein conjured a piece of goat skin and wrote down a divination statement. "I should obtain the clown potion through the Nighthawks." He put his pen down and untangled the spirit pendulum on his wrist. He grabbed the pendulum firmly with his left hand, allowing the topaz to be suspended right above the piece of paper. He recited the statement 7 times. His eyes darkened, and the pendulum in his hand started to turn. It turned clockwise. It's a positive answer, so it's appropriate. But it'll be hard to say for the sequences after clown. I should seriously develop my tarot club. Klein did another divination to confirm the answer. After this, he used his hand and pressed down on the dark red star representing the sun. He wanted to bring the youth from the city of silver in early, and ask if he revealed whatever had happened in this world to the six-member council. If he hadn't, then Klein would give him a better way of knowing what time the gatherings would start. In a room of the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek sat silently by the side of his bed, waiting for the fool's summoning. In order to avoid being near anybody, he didn't even go out of the house after he returned. He had nearly finished all the food in his room. Bearing with the hunger and hearing the growls of his stomach, Derek felt as though he was a living corpse roaming around on a dark plain. However, he remained silent, nor did he stand. At that moment, he saw a dark red color spread in the air, quickly swallowing him. The gray, boundless, cold, lonely world appeared in his field of vision once again. Seated at the seat of honor, the fool, who was obscured by the thick fog, presented himself in front of him once more. Klein was satisfied that his summoning wasn't interrupted. He also confirmed that he didn't face any immediate danger. "Son, we meet again," he said smilingly using Jotun. Derek was shocked by what had happened. He lowered his head. "You are a fool who keeps his word. The other members will arrive in a while. Before that, I'll confirm a few things with you first." Klein used the loan language this time, but willed the mysterious space to translate it into Jotun. The words rang through the air, coming to Derek in Jotun. He asked curiously, "What's the matter?" "Well, now that I've gained a certain degree of mastery over Jotun, the mysterious space above the gray fog can translate whatever I say in real time. This means that I won't have to worry about justice and the hanged man not understanding whatever Sun says. Sigh, why does a boss like me have to work so tirelessly?" Klein pinched the bridge of his nose. He laughed and shook his head. "I'll permit you to recite my name. Remember the incantations I'm going to tell you." The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Derek's pupils constricted when he heard that. But he didn't dare to get distracted. He recited it over and over again in his heart, then confirmed it with the fool. "You have to use a simple ritual and recite my name whenever you return to the City of Silver. I will notify you in advance for future gatherings. You need not pay too much attention to it on other days, nor do you have to avoid anyone. When you receive my notification, isolate yourself within 1,000 heartbeats." Klein told him the method he had been deliberating on for quite some time. This was essentially a response to a prayer, as he had to consider the situation regarding the City of Silver, as well as save time. Klein opted to omit the other steps of the ritual, since it was a plea directed toward him. 1,000 heartbeats? Derek muttered to himself. Klein described the general idea of the tarot club to Derek, then took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. Derek froze for a while, instinctively looking at the wondrous item. When 3 approached, Klein extended his hand and pressed on the dark red stars representing justice. And the hanged man Derek didn't blink as he witnessed this. He saw light burst forth opposite and beside him, as 2 hazy figures extended from within. Audrey Hall surveyed her surroundings and froze suddenly. She then heard the ever-calm voice of Mr. Fool. "This is our newest member, his code name is Sunday. This is Miss Justice, and that is Mr. Hanged Man." "Newest member?" Audrey was shocked at first, then her shock immediately turned to joy. She was very excited to see the development of the tarot club. She felt like a protagonist. The hanged man Alger creased his brows, a little upset that the fool would drag in a new member so suddenly. He should have at least mentioned it to us. But a great figure like Mr. Fool wouldn't have to care about our feelings. He thought in exasperation before giving a simple greeting to Justice and Sunday. In this short process, Audrey entered her spectator state and paid close attention to the newest member Sunday. He should be quite young. His body language tells me that he's a little nervous and restrained, but he ultimately maintains a tolerable air of silence, giving the feeling of, a lone wolf. Yes, a lone wolf. Audrey thought as she cast her gaze at the fool who was seated at the end of the long bronze table. She said in joy, "Mr. Fool, I've collected another 2 pages of Emperor Rosel's diary." Chapter 144. Three-way deal. Actually there were 3 pages, but the characters were too complicated and too difficult to memorize. My limit is only a little over 2 pages. I would mess up if I were to memorize more. The rest will have to wait until the next gathering, Audrey added in her head. New pages of Roselle's diary? Klein's mind stirred. He smiled and asked in reply when he already knew the answer. Miss Justice, what do you need? Audrey's eyes beamed with excitement, but she replied in a reserved manner. You know that I'll soon fully digest the spectator potion. I hope that I can get the formula for the telepathist potion, so that I can prepare the ingredients ahead of time. I know that there isn't much content for 2 pages of the diary, and it might not equal to the value of the telepathist formula, so I'll give you another page. I'll also pay you a sum of money on the side. She had yet to finish what she said when she suddenly felt that it had come out wrong. She couldn't help but berate herself in her head. Mr. Fool is at the very least an important figure which approaches that of a god. How could he be bought over by money? Hence, Audrey couldn't maintain her spectator state as she hurriedly added with a stammer. That's not what I meant. Mr. Fool, what I meant is that you can determine the compensation that you'd like. Yes, that's what I meant. I like your earlier suggestion. I would answer like this. When you have fully digested the spectator potion, you will get the formula you need. I have a subordinate. No, I have to use the word adorer. That sounds more awesome. He happens to be handling some matters that require money, and this is his anonymous account in Backland Bank. Yes, then I will disguise myself and make an anonymous account in Backland Bank. Klein didn't answer immediately, but weighed his words carefully with an unfathomable expression. Backland Bank was one of the 7 major banks in the Lone Kingdom, and as such, it possessed the right to clear transactions. The Lone Kingdom settled accounts with receipts to take care of cash transfer business between banks within the same city in a centralized manner. However, unlike banks in the Intis Republic, not all banks were part of the same league. The biggest 7 banks held on to these rights. Hence, they were called the clearance banks, making other banks rely on them. Transferring money from a different location, on the other hand, could only be done within the same bank. It would be completed by squaring accounts between branches. With the invention of the steam locomotive and telegram, the efficiency of these transfers had been enhanced drastically. Just then the son Derek Berg suddenly spoke. The telepathist potion formula? Telepathist, that is followed by psychoanalyst? Audrey looked towards him puzzledly. You know of it? At the same time, Miss Justice saw a problem through her instinct as a spectator. The young man had used the ancient title psychoanalyst, instead of the modern term, psychiatrist. This guy is very strange. Audrey examined Son's every movement. Derek didn't think that he behaved any differently but replied seriously, I can get you the formula. Then, he felt guilty as he couldn't provide it immediately. He tried his best to explain himself. It's a sequence pathway that stemmed from the dragon race. And our city of Silver was once ruled by the Giant King's imperial household. As you know, the giants and the dragons are sworn enemies. Hence, the city of Silver has all of sequence 9, 8, and 7. I have ways to get them. This kid. I already warned him not to speak carelessly or expose his origins. In the end, Klein nearly wanted to extend his hand to cover his face. Sigh, although the son appears to be in great pain, very mature and silent for his age. He's just a boy after all. However, that clarifies one thing for me. It turns out that the spectator sequence's origins stem from the dragon race. It's no wonder that the symbol formed by stars behind Miss Justice's high chair is the dragon. The city of Silver has preserved history well. Klein maintained his posture of leaning against the back of his chair, while he listened thoughtfully to the son's description. In fact, he could have easily stopped the son from exposing those matters. As long as he didn't help in the simultaneous translation, Justice and the hanged man wouldn't have understood him at all. However, Klein took a different approach. He felt that it might help him consolidate his mighty and mysterious image in the minds of the 3 members effectively. Hence, he listened with a smile, and didn't make a sound. Giant King Dragon Race, the City of Silver. Audrey was confused. She first took a look at the hanged man opposite her, but she could tell that he was shocked and confused as well from his body language. She looked sideways towards the seat of honor on the long bronze table. She saw the fool sitting on the high chair, engulfed in thick grayish-white fog. His right arm was placed on the armrest, while he leaned sideways leisurely. He showed no shock, no curiosity, no thoughts and no doubt. He only looked at them with a smile. He knows. He knew all of this. Audrey and Alger made the definite judgment almost at the same time. The City of Silver, I've never heard of this place. Where is it? Audrey probed while Alger listened attentively. At that very moment, Derek Berg's head was filled with questions as well. He could tell that besides the godlike fool, Justice and the hanged man were some sort of beyonder. In the forsaken land of the gods, besides the people in the City of Silver, Derek had never seen another living human. So he asked in reply, "If you aren't residents of the City of Silver, which city-state are you from?" Sigh. Klein couldn't help but wish to sigh again. Audrey trembled her lips, momentarily at a loss for words. Yes. The hidden meaning behind his question is that if you don't want to answer a similar question, don't pry into the questions about where the other person lives. Miss Justice nodded faintly and elegantly kept quiet. Obviously, Alger had misunderstood the son's intentions as well. He didn't know the other person was really just asking straightforwardly, so he kept quiet too. When Derek didn't receive any reply, he seemed to realize what was happening. He didn't bring it up again and instead said, "I will try to get the telepathist potion formula as soon as possible. I would like to use it to exchange for the beginning sequence pathway of the sun." Sun sequence pathway? Sequence 9 Bard? Alger asked in reply. Derek thought and said, "Probably, but I lack information about it." Klein, who was watching from the side, decided to get involved, because he didn't want to risk anyone taking his business away. He smiled and said, "I believe Miss Justice doesn't have the Bard formula, but Mr. Hanged Man seems to be able to get it." Seeing Audrey nod, Klein continued with a faint smile. "I will give the sun the Bard formula. The sun will pass the telepathist potion to Miss Justice as soon as possible. Try to get it done within the next 2 gatherings. Miss Justice, please pass me the new pages of Roselle's diary. Then the deal is done." Yes, according to the law of equivalent exchange, the sun is on the losing end of this transaction, but as of now, he has only made a promise. When he really provides the telepathist formula, Miss Justice can consider how to compensate him again. Or I will compensate him while Miss Justice provides money to one of my adorers who needs to do some things recently. Haha. That's because the sun might not necessarily be able to receive Miss Justice's cash or ingredients as compensation. Klein intentionally added that final statement to redirect the Hanged Man and Justice's focus onto the fact that Sun might not be able to receive her compensation. He also did that to place himself in an unfathomable position. Then, everyone would ignore the adorer that lacked money, might not necessarily receive the compensation. Where exactly is the sun? The southern continent? Alger suddenly creased his eyebrows. The origin of the sun is mysterious too. As expected, Mr. Fool does have subordinates in reality. Audrey finally saw her hope of becoming a Sequence 8 telepathist. What other thoughts could she have? She suppressed her excitement and flashed a faint smile as she said, "I have no objections." Neither do I. When Derek saw that he could obtain the beginning sequence of the sun pathway, he nodded without hesitation. He couldn't care less about the additional compensation. Alger, who was out of the 3-way deal, didn't have the right to speak. Although he could get the formula of Bard, he would need to wait a week or 2 as well. At that moment Klein, who had successfully delayed the compensation to the next gathering, or the following one after, pressed his palm forward happily. The Bard formula surfaced. Main ingredients: a crystal sunflower or an adult flint bird's tail feather, or a firebird's tail feather. A piece of siren rock or a singing sunflower. Supplementary ingredients: a blade of midsummer grass, 5 drops of July wine juice, a blade of elf dark leaf. He sent the formula before the sun, and saw the young man first crease his eyebrows and then relax. Yes, the ingredients in the forsaken land of the gods will still be known by their ancient names. Luckily, my formula was obtained directly from the eternal blazing Sunday. The knowledge that I gained used ancient names and various replacements. Klein suddenly cast his eyes of realization towards Miss Justice. Audrey looked at the son who was memorizing the formula. Then she quickly willed the 2 pages of the diary that she had memorized. The diary immediately appeared on the yellowish-brown goatskin, and with a flash, appeared in Klein's hands. Just like before, he started reading immediately. November 3rd. Matilda is 3 months pregnant now. I even find those maidservants who come from the villages beautiful. No, I can't lower my standards. Coincidentally, Countess Florice has invited me to join a private party, hee. November 8th. Archbishop Van Esten sought my help. What can I do for an archbishop? November 9th. It turns out that there is actually a secret hidden within sequence pathways. Archbishop Esten told me that after becoming a sequence 5 beyonder, the rest of the sequences could be replaced with sequences of the same level from 1 or 2 other pathways. In other words, it starts from the mid-sequence to high sequence. But this is only limited between those 1 or 2 pathways. If it's replaced with a potion from a wrong pathway, semi-insanity is the mildest outcome, and one can't advance any further. This way, one can begin substituting pathways from sequence 4 onwards. Sleepless and corpse collector pathways. Yes, the Church's savant and mystery prior pathways can also substitute for one another at a high sequence. Chapter 145. Request for cooperation. Some pathways are interchangeable after sequence 5? That's different from what the Nighthawks told me. Isn't it a fact that you cannot change your pathway after you choose one? Wasn't it mentioned that diverging from your pathway would allow one to obtain strange, mysterious powers? But that person would definitely go insane, and would never be able to advance. To think that there are some hidden exceptions to this. Klein looked at the diary, his pupils constricting. He didn't think that the Emperor Roselle would spout nonsense about something like this. After all, the surprise in his words were so real. But he didn't assume that the information Emperor Roselle had received was definitely correct. There was also a possibility that he had been lied to, or that he had misinterpreted the information. I will need to verify this. I'll commit it to my memory first. Klein reminded himself, then thought deeply about this. If what Roselle described here turns out to be correct, then the sequence pathways go deeper than what I imagined. It hides many secrets. The complete pathway possessed by the Nighthawks is sleepless. They also possess a relatively complete path in the Corpse Collector, which they have up to sequence 4. To think that those are interchangeable after sequence 5. The other potion chains they have are even less complete, as some pathways only possess the first sequence. Similarly, the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery holds the complete pathway of the Savant, and has a relatively complete pathway for the Mystery Prior. These can also be interchanged at high sequences. Interesting. I wonder which pathway is interchangeable with the Seer pathway? The Apprentice or Marauder that was mentioned by the Emperor. There's a high possibility that the first 5 sequence pathways of the Seer pathway would each provide a separate ability, and that these abilities would be combined at sequence 4. At that stage, there should be no way to interchange it with some other potion. Klein retracted his thoughts, once again placing his attention onto the diary. He noticed that although the 2 diary pages were connected, the content was not in chronological order. The dates belonged to 2 different periods. This could be a mistake made by whoever copied their content. April 9th. The relationships between the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, the Church of the Lord of Storms, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom are poor. They see each other as enemies. The Church of the Evernight Goddess is at odds with the Church of the God of Combat from the Fasak Empire. This can be taken advantage of. These are all facts worth considering. April 13th. I participated in an ancient organization's gathering. I never expected them to be members of this organization as well. It sure was frightening. To think that the second blasphemy slate was in the hands of this organization. This is the first time I'm seeing this legendary item. Indeed, it was hiding an unimaginable secret, hee. Perhaps there will come a day when I will create a blasphemy slate unique to me. No, a set of them, with each one hiding an ultimate secret. Holy fuck, Emperor. Why didn't you specify the name of this ancient organization? You're killing me. Perhaps, Roselle had a reason, or didn't dare to write down the name of the organization, even if he was using Chinese. Klein looked at the diary, a little uncomfortable and puzzled. But with this page of the diary, Klein could finally confirm that Emperor Roselle had seen the second blasphemy slate. Furthermore, he created a set of cards after that. Each card represented a pathway to godhood. Yes, that could be the ultimate secret that matches each pathway to godhood. I wonder where that set of 22 cards are now. That ancient organization managed to obtain the second blasphemy slate. Klein's thoughts flowed quickly, but he quickly reined in his thoughts. He shifted his gaze away from the diary and shot it towards the hanged man, justice, and the sun. He smiled and said, "Actually, you didn't need to wait for me. It's our honor." Alger had already reined in his dissatisfaction as he answered humbly. Audrey thought for a moment before smiling. "Mr. Fool, the open selection of government officials through examinations that you described previously has already garnered the support of the king and the prime minister. It will soon be passed by the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and is predicted to be implemented early next year." "It looks like the king and the prime minister still use their brains," Alger mocked out of habit. "Well, with Benson's intellect and diligence, his grammatical and accounting skills should be passable by early next year. But once it's passed by the two houses, it will definitely be announced widely by the various newspapers. I wonder how long Benson's advantage will last. The earlier the examination, the better. Sigh. There's no way Benson can triumph over the elites who graduated from the various universities in such a short period of time. But he need not compete against them. The positions they're fighting for wouldn't be the same. Those people might only have their sights trained on positions, such as the cabinet secretary or finance secretary." The silent Klein worried for his brother as he nodded his head with a smile. Audrey straightened her back when she saw the fool's affirmative nod. She said with a smile, "Mr. Hanged Man, you got me to check on something for you previously. I've received an answer. The king has been convinced by the prime minister and won't seek revenge on the Fasak Empire at the East Balam shore for the time being. I think you can now give me the extra payment that you promised me." Alger thought for a few seconds before saying, "Miss Justice, thank you for your answer. This eases my concerns over certain things. What kind of extra payment do you want? I'll consider it if it's within reason." Audrey smiled, obviously prepared. "Clues to the psychology alchemists, or clues to the main ingredients of the potion telepathist? Of course, that can wait until after the sun hands the formula over to me." "No problem," Alger said without hesitation. 2 seats away from the hanged man, Derek Berg couldn't understand a single word. He was very confused, feeling that he only understood a few terms, but couldn't string them together to provide any logical sense. A method of selecting officials through examination? A king and prime minister, House of Lords, House of Commons, East Balam Shore, Fasak Empire, psychology alchemists? He understood none of that. Fasak, the root of the word, came from Jotun. What connection did it have with the fallen giant king's imperial household? Derek looked at Justice and the hanged man, suddenly having the feeling that they might not come from the same world. Could there be another city-state, or one that had formed a nation, somewhere far away from the city of Silver in the Cursed Lands? Derek remained silent and listened on. He had a faint understanding of why the mysterious fool mentioned that he might not be able to receive the monetary compensation Justice was going to give him. To be able to gather people this far away from each other, disregarding the terrifying monsters hiding in the darkness of the Cursed Lands, the fool might really be a god, an ancient god, he thought. After accomplishing everything that she set out to do, Audrey wanted to become a silent observer. But she suddenly remembered something. She spoke in a hurry. "I recently came into contact with the Beyonder Circle and found out about a powerful person named Mr. A. Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. Sun. Do you know of this person's background and identity?" "I don't even know what you're talking about." Derek maintained his silence. "Mr. A? I only know a Mr. Z. With such a similar code name, could he also be from the Aurora Order?" Klein made a guess, but didn't give an answer. He had to maintain his image and try not to give answers he wasn't confident in. If he had to, he would give a vague description just like a charlatan. Alger looked at the fool and found him calm and unchanging. It was hard to read his true thoughts. Thus, he said in a deliberative tone, "The Aurora Order is at odds with the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. So members of these churches understand the Aurora Order more than any other organization. And I happen to know something about them. You need not explain. I know that you come under the Lord of Storms. Of course, you could be a whistleblower. But why would there be hatred between the Aurora Order and the three ancient churches?" Klein smiled but didn't speak. He looked calmly at the hanged man. Alger knew that he couldn't hide his sequence pathway from the fool, but didn't pay too much attention to it, and continued. "The Aurora Order has 5 saints and 22 oracles. These oracles use the alphabet as their code names, from Mr. A to Mr. X. They are beyonders, with the weakest being sequence 7, and the strongest sequence 5. They are all adept at hiding themselves. Should an oracle die, a new oracle will take their place. I cannot guarantee that the Mr. A you spoke of is the Mr. A from the Aurora Order, but there is a good possibility. As for the details of the Aurora Order, I have mentioned that to you before." Audrey nodded, becoming even more cautious of Mr. A. She said, feeling a little pinch in her heart, "Thank you for your answer, Mr. Hanged Man. You need not make a payment anymore." "No. I wish to ask for your help with the answer just now, as well as provide extra compensation," Alger said with a deep voice. "What help?" Audrey asked curiously. Alger thought for a few seconds before saying, "I received intelligence that the pirate Kalangos, codenamed Rear Admiral Hurricane, has secretly gone onshore and infiltrated Backland. I don't know what he's up to, but I hope that you can help me locate his whereabouts. As for whatever happens afterwards, you need not put yourself in danger." "Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos? One of the 7 great admiral pirates?" Audrey widened her eyes, almost unable to maintain her spectator state. What was the thing she wanted to do the most after she became a Beyonder? It was, of course, to interact with the people that only existed in the fables of the nobles. Yes, he's a sequence 6 Beyonder of the Path of the Sailor, a wind-blessed. He also has a miraculous item that could be classified as a sealed artifact. He's quite crafty and cruel. Don't attempt to deal with him," Alger introduced seriously. He suddenly turned to Klein. "Mr. Fool, can I get your adorer to assist me at the critical moment? I would pay a price that interests you. The only adorer I have is myself." Klein lampooned to ease his emotions as he smiled. "That is built on the premise that my adorer happens to be in Backland." "All right." Alger retracted his gaze, a little disappointed, but also a little expectant. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."